evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's completed their little Adelaide adventure with 2 wins from 2 games, taking their interstate win tally to 21 wins from 28 games since 2021. We are the travel professionals. Joining me tonight to dissect another clinical win on the road is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben Man. Good evening to our listeners. Isn't it great to have footy back in the city where it really belongs? But what was even better was getting the results that were probably a lot better than what most people, including myself, expected. So we'll analyse all that very shortly.
If you would ask me, you know, when we got the fixture, whether we'd have any chance of winning one, let alone to both of them, I would have said you're crazy.
Yep.
But also joining us tonight to take a look at all the stats that matter is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And Adelaide 2 for 2. It's fantastic. I like the title of your report this week, George, the business trip. It was clearly a theme. Was that what you call the report? Am I imagining that?
No, that was what Stephen May called it, a business trip.
No, I know a few people called it business trip. I read a report on Demonland that also called it business trip, but it was clearly a theme. And so they went over on a business trip and came home with I don't know, what do you get on a business trip? 8 points.
Yes. That you do. Well, each week I put the call out to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we love the feedback, and we do read it out each week on the show to give our reviewers a shout out, giving us a 5 stars. 5 stars in effect helps boost the podcast. It brings more listeners to the show, and that in turn drives more people to Demonland, and therefore we get more contributions from more voices to the show from out of the audience. So the best way you can help out the podcast is by amplifying us in the form of these reviews, or just by helping to spread the word about Demonland to your Demon family and friends. AI Redirect writes, sit breathless waiting for all the info that I can think about in my own space on Monday nights. You three keep me thinking that I'm still present at the game. I want the rule about the ball hitting the goalpost and going through to be a successful goal changed. Your non-Brereton clarity plus perspective, and yet different perspectives, always makes me smile. Great effort and much appreciated. Well, thanks, AI. Your review and the 5 stars is very much appreciated by us. Track Forever writes, amazing and insightful podcast about the club that we love. Hi, guys. Just wanted to say thanks for an amazing show that you put on every week. You are all amazing, and I look forward to the show every week. Thank you, Andy, George, and Binman. And thank you, Track Forever, for that amazing review. So keep the feedback coming. Would really appreciate a 5 stars on Apple Podcast. It helps the algorithm get more people to us. Don't forget to click that write a review link and write that review, as well as giving us the 5 stars, and we'll read it out on the show. So if you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week, or just slide into our DMs, and we won't read out your full name on the show. And in addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and or any of your preferred podcasting apps, the Demonland podcast is available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for the Demonland podcast to find our channel. We'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And if you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been over to demonland.com, head on over there, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to being able to post the questions or comments for the show, there are so many topics and threads discussing everything about the Ds. So join in on that conversation. And if you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we are going to talk about, then please give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. And I'll answer the call. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when there's a break in our conversation. And during the week, you can give that number a call, leave us a message. We'll play it out on the show. We've got 5 voicemailers lined up tonight. So if you are listening live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We will try and be attentive to the comments and questions there and give you your dues. We are live every Monday. So if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. So I'm going to get straight into the match overview. The D's and the Crows headlined the opening of Gather Round on the Thursday night big stage as they clashed at Adelaide Oval. And it was the Demons who continued their impressive form, securing a hard-fought victory over the winless Crows. And despite facing the challenge of a 5-day break and the return of the battered and bruised Stephen May from injury, the Demons showcased us some class when it counted to notch up their 4th consecutive win. And from the outset, both teams were determined to assert their dominance on the contest, and with the parochial home crowd behind them, the Crows aimed to make a statement early in the contest. However, the Demons' defensive wall, led by the indomitable Stephen May, proved impenetrable, denying the Crows any significant scoring opportunities in the first quarter. May's commanding presence, despite nursing rib and back injuries, set the tone for Melbourne's defensive efforts alongside emerging star Judd McVee, who continues to display a maturity beyond his years. And the Demons repelled many of Adelaide's attacks with precision and composure. And the Crows forward line struggled to find some avenues to goal. They did end up kicking 2 goals, 5 at the end of the first quarter. Might have been more goals had they kicked straight. But as the game progressed, Melbourne's defensive resolve remained unyielding, conceding just a solitary goal in the second quarter. Jake Lever, Tom McDonald, Blake House, Trent Rivers and Christian Salem all contributed to Melbourne's defensive solidity, frustrating the Crows forwards and limiting their scoring opportunities. And despite Adelaide's spirited efforts, Melbourne's third quarter blitz, spearheaded by Bailey Fritsch, effectively put the game beyond reach. Fritsch, who was being relatively quiet in the first half, exploded into action, booting 3 crucial goals to extend Melbourne's lead and assert their dominance. And while Adelaide mounted a late comeback in the final quarter, Melbourne's commanding three-quarter time 28-point lead proved insurmountable. And despite closing the gap with a couple of late goals, the Crows ultimately fell short as Melbourne held on for a 15-point victory. Petracca's midfield brilliance and Gord's dominance in the ruck underlie Melbourne's overall strength and versatility in a game where 4-time Bluey winner Clayton Oliver, who's nursing an injured hand, was quiet, as was Jack Viney, who was ill in the lead-up to the match. As the final siren sounded and the D's celebrated another hard-earned victory on the road in hostile territory, overcoming the challenges posed by a demanding fixture, and they further solidified their status as a genuine premiership contender. And they face another test this week against the Lions to further bolster those credentials as we edge closer to the well-needed bye. Guys, any thoughts? George, I'll start with you. Any brief thought?
Yeah, we'll keep it brief. There's a lot of things that we'll talk about tonight. Really impressed with the defensive efforts, and I'll talk about that. There were some observations I made. I watched a replay because there was no other Demons match this week, so I got to see the game twice. And the second time, of course, you don't have to worry about whether we win or not, apparently. So we won that as well.
Your heart rate.
Don't you watch the replay every week, George?
No, not every week. No, usually watch a Casey game or something else when I'm allowed to. So, but it was really interesting.
I watched it straight away again after a win, and I've watched this game. I actually just finished watching it before the show.
Some of my top lives outside of the footy club and
yeah, well, I'm not watching any media, so I had a big hole to fill, and I thought I might as well watch the game again.
No, so it was really interesting, and I was able to see a few things that certainly I didn't see during the game when I was watching it live. But really impressed with the defence. What did strike me during the game was here was 2 teams, one off a 5-day break, one off a 6-day break, who'd travelled from Perth. It was really exhausting for both of them, and I think come the final quarter, that was pretty obvious. The Crows did exactly what they did the previous week, 2 goals, 5 in the first quarter, and not much beyond that. They don't have a great avenue to goal. It's either Fogarty or Tex Walker, and that's about it. So that they're going to struggle. I thought they'd do a lot better at the start of the season, as per my predictions, but the way they're running at the moment, they're not looking particularly good. So I don't think that Mr. Nix as the coach is probably the right person at the moment. They're certainly fit enough because we know Burgess is running the show there. But what the other interesting thing that I picked up in this match was I don't think there were any goal reviews.
No, I don't think there was.
which is probably I think that's the first since they ever brought in the goal review system. They seem to be occurring in every single game at every opportunity. So
there was one, I'm pretty sure.
My crypto went down over the weekend over that.
Well, maybe I'm imagining it because I watched a fair bit of footy on this. But there were a few goal reviews over the weekend where it was like I couldn't work out what they were reviewing. It was
exactly, yeah. The thing that I'm finding really annoying about the goal reviews, and no doubt everybody else is annoyed, is that the goal umpires aren't getting behind the ball anymore. They're standing in the middle of the goal square and looking at across to the points and things like that. They're not in the old days. A couple of years ago now, the goal umpire got behind the ball and the trajectory of the ball as it came in. So then they're trying to make an assessment about whether it's going through the goals or the points or hitting the post or not, when they're actually not behind it. So it's not surprising we're getting all this, but just frustrating. But glad that we didn't have any, as far as we know, in our game.
It was a terrific win. It was. I thought I said last week on the podcast that it was a danger game, big danger game. It's incredibly hard to get up for a 5-day break after. In any game, it's hard to get up after a 5-day break. But it's easy to forget the intensity of that Port game. That was a phenomenal game of footy. The Port game, intense emotionally, intense physically. To play another game of football 5 days later against a team who just had to win, just simply had to win for their season, was a huge effort. So it was a massive danger game. And as I said last week, if we could tough out a win, and I was happy with a scrappy win, and it was a scrappy win, I thought, but I felt like we were in control for 80-90% of the game, that we'd go into the Lions game next week 4-1, and favourites in that game. I had a look before, we're $1.41 favourites. That's Winks level favourites, so it's a bit unders in my book, but nonetheless we go into that game 4-1 with a real shot at going into the break 5-1, 2 weeks break, 11 days break, 13 days break into the Richmond game. Yeah, so massive win, huge win. And just a comment, I reckon the sort of sense of how well the Crows played is dimmed somewhat by, I don't know if you watched the press conference. I rate Nix. I reckon he's terrific. I just think their list isn't as strong as what everyone had sort of thought it was on the back of last year. Again, as I talked about, last week, George, maybe it was before the show, but our bottom 6 is as good as, if not better than anyone in the AFL, and their bottom 6 really falls away. They brought in 5 changes. In part that was obviously because of their losses, but no doubt it was because to bring in some fresh legs to look to take advantage of our the 5-day break and the fatigue that we suffered in this game. So, but I thought he was so devastated in the press conference and frustrated. But they played a lot better, I think, than even what a lot of the commentary was. Certainly, their effort levels was fantastic. They lacked a bit of polish, I thought. And I think that, as I talked about last week, they got those 2 big fellas up forward, and their whole forward line's built around Fogarty and Tex Walker having decent games, and they were both completely shut out, I thought. So a massive win for the club, and to go away from this sort of a week or whatever it was, 10 days in a week in Adelaide with 8 points is huge for our season. It was so important to get this 4 points. So, it was a grind of a match in many ways, but for me, it was just a huge to get 4 points too. If we'd lost that game, and as I said, it was a danger game, it would have taken a bit of a shine off the Port win in some respects. But terrific. And I think for me, the most impressive part of the win was last week. I spoke last week. It was our leaders who stood up, and I was a bit disappointed. There was a bit of a drop off, I thought, into our bottom 5, 6 players who were generally our younger players struggled a bit last week against Port. So I thought we had several average players last week and also this week. But the difference this week, Track was incredible again, another amazing performance. Max was, fantastic again. Coaches' votes, brilliant as well. But I thought it was our younger players who really made a difference. McVee had been the standout one, obviously, particularly in that first quarter. But Windsor played well. Cos played played well. Chandler played well. They were all fantastic. Howes was, I thought, solid without being brilliant. JVR tried his guts out, got a couple of goals. So our younger players really stood up in this game, which I thought was fantastic and was something really for the club to hang their hat on going forward.
Certainly is. Well, Big Man, do you want to get into some of the stats?
Indeed. So the 2024 Red and Blueprint, it was a really interesting game from that perspective. I've talked a lot about our new method of playing, back half football, transition football. It's been really interesting watching other teams struggle with this. It's Collingwood have essentially started using a Melbourne model of 22-23, and my theory is that they've not got run in their legs, and so a transition football game requires extraordinary amount of all team run, aerobic fitness, and players running to, and also all team defense to protect on the turnover. So it's really interesting the way the season's panning out. The teams that look in good shape are able to implement this sort of game plan that I've been talking about, the Cats being one of them, us, the Swans, the Tigers, even GWS struggled a little bit with it on the weekend, but they're definitely up there, whereas the Pies don't seem to have run in their legs and having to play basically a forward half game, which is really the Goodwin game from 21, 20 or 20, 21, 22, 23. So this game for me felt a little bit like it was a bit of a hybrid version of front half football and territory football, but also, this new method of transition from the back half. So the key categories this year in the Red and Blueprint, defence, contest, they're always going to be the same. Transition, so that back half football, scores from turnover, and as I flagged last week, fitness is a key thing, and there's a question about fatigue, and I think it really highlights the impact of fitness on what sort of game plan you're able to play, which sort of picks up on what I was saying about the Pies. And on watch is clearances, and so as I flagged last week, I think clearance is a bit of mirage, and it came back down to earth in terms of the differential this week. So, we were relatively strong in that, but we certainly didn't dominate the way we did against Port. I thought it was a really funny game stats wise. We as I said, we still were playing this new back half game, but in some ways it was a bit of an old school performance where really it came down to, our fundamentals of defense and contest. Whenever you hear Goodwin talk, whenever you hear anyone from the club talk, that's what they talk about, is that Melbourne football, the DNA is defense and contest. So defense taking that, they could only manage 63 points from their 54 inside 50s. As George said, the defence was brilliant all night. Hard to go past McVee in that first quarter. Kept their most talented forward. I thought shut him out brilliantly. I'd be a bit disappointed if I was a Crows fan in how well he was shut out. McVee, he's so calm under pressure. He looks like he's a 200 gamer. And I don't know, Georgie, he looks like he's got taller. He looks like he's got bigger, considerably bigger from last season without losing his sort of athleticism. Am I imagining that?
I find it hard to believe that he's grown that much, but his poise is just amazing.
Yeah, well, maybe he's just filled out a bit. I mean, he's still young. Like men continue to fill out to their sort of mid-20s, I guess.
They don't update any of the height and weight stats. If Max had mentioned last year at some point when they were talking about something, I think that you remember the whole skin folds issue. He said he mentioned that they don't update the height weight stats from when you're basically a rookie. So but
I thought he was brilliant. I thought Lever was brilliant. I thought Howes was solid. Again, it just was a huge tick for our system and our structure. And again, you could see how often the Crows wanted to move the ball quickly from the back half, and were just frustrated by their inability to find a spot. They finally pulled the trigger at one stage. It ended up being a goal, but really you give this to our defense when they're trying to move it out. The goal that our first goal in the second half, that Clary intercepted the ball in the corridor and then laced out a pass to Fritter all by himself. That's a classic example of turnover football, of what we're trying to do. The opposition struggling to get it out of their forward line and looking to transition from their back half, and they take off they come out after half time. Obviously, Nix has probably been in their ear about, come on, we've got to get on our bike and attack. 2 minutes into the second half, they do that. They bite off a kick to the corridor, and the D's are setting up super well defensively to stop the opposition transitioning the footy, and we're sweating on that. And you could see how quickly that Oliver read that ball. He was waiting for it and he sweated on it, and that set up a key goal. Actually, I thought so. So on defense, our defensive system is just, I think, the best in the AFL. As I said, only 63 points from them from their 54 inside 50s. Their expected score was only 8 points more, or I think maybe 11 points more than maybe it was a bit more than what they got, but so ours was down as well. So we still won that game on expected score. So there was no sense that they burnt a lot, but they certainly didn't take their advantage of that time. They had momentum in the first quarter. Intercepts, so this is defence still. Intercepts were +4 for intercepts. Intercept marks, we were +4 as well, 17 to 13. Scores from turnover, so this is a big one in terms of indicating where you're at. We scored 43 points to their 35 points, so +8 from turnover. So they still did pretty well, but in a game we'll win by 15, we're +8 in turnover. This one was an interesting stat for a team that's, as I mentioned, have relied so heavily on Walker and Fogarty having good games. We had 10 marks inside 50 to their 2, but we got better transition. So, like that Fritter one, that was a mark inside 50. We had more uncontested marks than them. So the second big one, the fundamental contest for us, contested possessions, was 131 to 129, so +2, which was really good. After the first quarter, they were +8. So that means that we were +10 for the rest of the game, which is terrific given we were definitely fatiguing in that last quarter. Pressure was fascinating. The pressure game, I was amazed actually when I saw these numbers. We were 201. Remember, 200 is considered elite for pressure in the quarter. They were 172 in that first quarter. So we actually came out and we were, we threw ourselves into this game, and we were clearly set for a contest and being physical and leaving Adelaide with the points. It was 186, 188 in the second quarter. Then, curiously, the third quarter, ours dropped right away to 162 to their 177. Which was 162. I'm not sure, but I think that might be our lowest so far for a single quarter this season. I'd have to look, but it would certainly be up there or down there, whichever way you want to view that. The last quarter, this was what I found amazing. We were definitely fatiguing. And in that last quarter, we went at 205 in that quarter to their 192. So I just thought that was a brilliant effort level, basically, from right across the board. For the match, it was 190 to 182. So that's a very high pressure game of footy. Curiously, our 2 highest scoring quarters were also our 2 lowest pressure quarters. Maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe that's to do with that sort of faster ball movement. There's obviously going to be less pressure. So I thought that was really interesting. Selwood said early in the game that both teams were playing spares behind the ball. We always play a spare behind the ball, as I've talked about a lot. And the Crows have a very similar defensive system, albeit a bit more aggressive, and they push up the ground. But Selwood then said at the start of the third quarter, they'd gone man-to-man. And I just wish that the coverage of football was more sophisticated, because I would love to know at what point that happened, whether that happened in the third quarter or it already happened in the second. But it clearly didn't work going from man-to-man. And I think that gave us the opportunity to score from the back half. 162, we scored 4-7 or 4-6 in the third quarter. It was our lowest pressure quarter. So that was interesting. Our top five pressure players against Port, and this sort of goes to my point about the leaders standing up in the game against Port. Our top 5 pressure players against Port were Viney, Nibbler, Track, Oliver, and Max Gorn, which is basically our leadership team right there. But against the Crows, our top 5 pressure players were Cade Chandler, Sparrow, Nibbler, Cozzy, and Jack Viney, who must be part of his pay structure to always be in the top 5 for pressures. I thought that was fantastic. 3 of those 5 players are 23 and under, young leaders in Chandler, Sparrow, and Cozzy. And what was most impressive is, just on a note on pressure points, they're the weighed sum of pressure acts. Physical pressure acts are worth 3.75 points. Closing acts are worth 2.25 points. Chasing acts are 1.5 points. And corralling are 1.2, which is why you get less pressure points when it's a big open, when it's an open flowing end-to-end game without much stoppages and free-flowing footy, because there's less corralling, there's less sort of pressure acts. Physical pressure acts are where one player literally touches another player, so a tackle or a bump or whatnot. What was just fantastic is that how they arrive at pressure points. Cade Chandler, he had 79 pressure points. His season average is 51.8 pressure points. Sparrow had 68 pressure points. His season average is 50.6 pressure points. And Cozzy had 62 pressure points, and his season average is 44.2 points. 44.2 pressure points. So that's just brilliant from 3 young leaders to stand up in a big game that we really desperate to win. That's where we won the game, I reckon. Those younger players stepping up, those young leaders, fantastic performance to have your highest pressure points for the season in a game where everyone's fatigued. Tackles, they'd be thrilled with this, +7 for tackles. This number has been down, so that I mentioned it last week, so they'd also be thrilled with this. We had 14 tackles inside 50, so we had 7 more than them, which I thought was a big factor in the game. Though curiously, ground ball gets, we were down again, but only -3 this time. Clearances were curious again, so we just didn't dominate the way we did in terms of the score. We scored from around the ground stoppages 23 points to 12, so 3-5, 23 to 1-6, 12 plus 11. But we were down 5 points from centre bounces. They scored 139 to our only. We scored 4 points from our centre bounces. We had 7 centre clearances. They had 12. So we only were +6 for scores from clearances, unlike, for instance, Port, which we were +24. Just on hitouts, this one was really interesting, and I think it sort of speaks to one of the advantages. I think we're setting up at stoppages to be aggressive and score. Maxi had 39 hitouts, 10 of them were to advantage. I've talked about Van Ruen's rocking. He had 15 hitouts, but 4 of them were he had 4 to advantage, and Riley O'Brien had 39 hitouts, but he only had 4 to advantage. And Burgess and Walker shared the other ruck duties, and neither of them had a hit out to advantage. So that we had 14 hit outs to advantage to their 4, and Van Rooyen had a much better night on the tools in terms of his ability to hit out to advantage. So last week this one was really, really key, I thought, to the game. I was amazed last week. Last week, we, as I mentioned, we only took 5 contested marks last week to Port's 9. Not a great number, whichever way you cut it. Perfect night for footy. It was windier this week, and by all accounts, it was quite windy at the ground, from what I understand, in terms of swirling around. But this week, and I think this was a big factor in the win, was we had 18 contested marks to their 9. So we were +9 for contested marks, 13 more than last week, which was, I think, a big factor in the game. It allowed us to control the ball on transition. There were a number of important marks that we took that stopped them moving the ball forward, and some marks inside 50 for us as well. So the transition from back half, our season average so far is 29.8. So let's say 30 points from the back half. In this game, it was 42. They could only manage 22 points from the back half, and keeping in mind last season they were either the best or the second best at that particular stats. They were the best team in the AFL, highest scoring team in the AFL, and the best team of moving it from their back half was either them or Port. But could only manage 22 from the back half, and that really was a big factor in us winning this game. Our season average is 22.6, so we kept them slightly under their season average. So 22 for context. Last week, Port scored 32 points from their back half. We kept the Crows, who are equally good, or had been at least last season equally good, from their back half to just 22. So great work defensively. And so we're plus 20 points from back half is a huge win. That could well be the game right there. And just on the last on turnovers, again, it was that's where I think Crows probably played a bit better than what people might be expecting. We got 43 points from turnovers, 6-7, and they had 5-5. So we only plus 8 for turnovers. So pretty impressive performance by the Crows in that space. Some general observations. The time in forward half sort of reflects that number that I mentioned before about the pressure. In the first quarter, it was 29% for us, 71% to them. So they just couldn't take advantage of getting the ball. But you could see, I think we're setting really deep at the moment defensively, and we're absorbing a lot of pressure. I think they're doing that to allow space to run in. So, as opposed to Port, whose defensive line pushes up really high and creates density, or narrows the gap between the half back line and the forward line, if that makes sense. We're setting really deep and allowing the ball to come in deep, and they got most of their goals from out from 30 metres out. So, well, a lot of their goals, not most. And that was really reflected in the first quarter, 29% forward half to 71. But then it evened up. We went to 58. And so our scoring quarters, the scores where we won the game, the second quarter and third quarter, we actually dominated time in forward half, 58% in the second quarter and 62% in the third quarter, swung back to 44-56. So for the match, it was 48-52. So interestingly, that's what I said, it was a bit of a hybrid game for this new method, which is scoring from the back half, but time in forward half and pressure. That was reflected by inside 50s, where they had 6 more than us, but we had 333 more metres gained. So yeah, really interesting game from a statistics perspective and the data, but a super tough win. And the contested marks were a terrific number, I thought, but I was most impressed with our pressure players and Cos, Chandler, and who's the third young player who was so impressive on defence, on pressure.
It was an interesting thing I saw on the Brisbane North game played at Norwood Oval. At one stage, both teams had pressure ratings of over 225.
In which game?
Brisbane North. It's because Norwood Oval is so tiny.
Yeah,
it's smaller than the SCG, smaller than Cardinia Park, and there's no room for anybody to move. It's got 2 boundary lines which are absolutely straight flat.
Yeah.
And so
like
completely blows all the statistics out the window, because nobody can move anywhere without being under pressure. Yep.
Well, that's right, because as I mentioned on the pressure points, every time players come into contact, that's at 3 points. That's the most pressure you can apply, is when it's so in tight, there's going to be lots of times where they're running into each other. And
I really hope we keep playing games in this gather round at Adelaide Oval, because that oval, Norwood Oval, love the history and the stands and all that. It's great, and the old suburban grounds, but really, how can they be playing AFL games on a ground of those dimensions, and can't even compare it to Cardinia Park. It's not the same.
And did you see what the AFL's proposing for next year, though? They've to have a game out at what is it,
Barossa Valley? I don't know.
In the Barossa Valley, they showed the ground. It's got gum trees around the boundary line, and you go, this is going to be even worse than Norwood, and they're going to spend $40 million bringing it up to standard. So anyhow,
can they spend that $40 million on a training ground for us?
That'd be nice. Yeah, we'll convince the South Australian government to do it.
Yeah, play gather round at Gosh's. But I agree, Andy. I I'd be furious if we had to play a bloody game at Norwood. Bugger that. I mean,
Yeah.
I reckon because gather round, everyone seems to love the whole thing. I don't care. I could care less, to be honest. I just like get out of Adelaide with 8 points is brilliant. I could see why everyone's so excited, but they should not be playing games of AFL football at non-AFL standard grounds. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'd be off my nana if we lost a game at Norwood. It would just, that's a joke of a football ground. Mount Barker is MCG size. That looks beautiful. But luckily in the game that I saw, there was no wind. But if, it's on big open plains, it would be windy, I'm guessing. So,
yeah, and what annoyed me is that the AFL were like Channel 7 were posting pictures on Twitter and Facebook about that straight line boundary as if it was something quaint. But it was like, guys, I just couldn't believe it because.
But that, to me, I mean, it also throws up the sort of symbiotic or parasitic sort of relationship between the Fox and Seven and the AFL, because there was no hint of criticising playing a game at Norwood. I heard not one negative comment about anything in gather round. It was almost like it was, an embargo on any criticism at all of the whole concept.
Yep. Amazing.
So I think Melbourne should just say, we're not going to play gather round unless we can play at Adelaide. And we're happy to play Port the week before, and we're happy to play Adelaide every year.
We've got a question about that, and we'll talk about that later, what you want in future years for gather round. Let's get into our listener questions. And the first one's on fatigue and the 5-day break. Demon WA says, loving the pod again this year, gents. When the Crows were making a charge late, all of the banter from last week's match review around MFC SS and the 5-day break were ringing in my ears. Gutsy in the end from the boys. Khan, you demons. Keen to see what B-Man's analysis of the stats look like. Lots of low numbers and down performance, but ultimately got it done. Well, you just heard all about it then. Lazy adds a 5-day break, slight fade out, and inaccurate kicking, including 5 points in the last quarter. Did fatigue catch up to us? Very happy to walk away with that win. Go Lordy asks about our inaccuracy, but I believe, or I hope, that it is related to fatigue. So we'll see what the guys think. Go Lordy writes, I rejected all the accuracy love directed towards the Demons after the Port Adelaide win because I believed 15 goals 6 was a fluke. I hate to say it, but I feel justified about our 10-18 effort against the Crows. I remember last week Goody saying, yes, we have been working on our kicking for years with Choco, as if the problem had been solved. Did any of the press ask him after the Crows game what happened this week? Perhaps he would argue that Billings' 3-point effort was because he hasn't been attending Choco's kicking classes for long enough. Fair dinkum. This monkey will kill us again in the finals. What can we do about it, George? Please give us an answer. And D-Star 9 says, firstly, absolutely love the podcast and the effort you all put in. I'm more the bin man type of supporter, but thoroughly enjoy Andy's MFCSS and George's insights and articulations. My observations on both games in Adelaide, we go into Port Adelaide game with best available team and found a way to win, even though we weren't at our optimum. I find these wins so satisfying because I know our best is yet to come. We hit the second game with some sore and tired bodies against a fired-up crowd and opponent. Again, we find a way to win. I felt we needed a buffer at three-quarter time because we would tire in the last. Adelaide may not have the quality, but they brought in 6 new young sets of legs, and we all know they are Burgess fit. I don't echo the sentiments of bad kicking. There were reasons. Big Benny Brown would never have been penciled in for that much footy, but he still put his body in for a target. Again, what I'd loved about these wins is the ways we've found to win will hold us in such good stead and give us so much to draw on as the season unfolds. Now I'm off to do a 5-star review, finally. And finally, Ross Millans asks, after we got 4 or 5 goals up, did we put the cue in the rack, slow the game down and manage the margin for the last quarter? It just felt to me that coming off a 5-day break, we did what we needed to do. And more than that, I feel there was more in the tank if we needed it, but we didn't. So be mad. How much do you think the fatigue of the grueling schedule that we've been dealt with, having played the extra game, because we played an extra game of everyone, and that game was played in oppressive conditions in opening round, the 3 interstate games, albeit we didn't have to travel this week, but still being away from home and then playing off a 5-day break with some banged up and bruised bodies. How much has fatigue played a role in our performance on Thursday night? And then, George, you can jump in with your thoughts on on that and Go Lordy's point about our goal kicking woes not being addressed, and whether you think fatigue might have played a role in the poor kicking for goal.
Absolutely, fatigue had a massive influence on that game. You could hear Track. I love how honest Track is, and I really like his interviews. He seems such an honest and engaging fella, but he said straight after the game that they were, that they knew with Burgess coaching the Crows that the Crows were, well, what he in fact said was that Burgess would be telling them that they could run the game out. I'm not sure entirely that they are as fit as perhaps they were last year. I don't know, but certainly fatigue plays a massive factor, and played a massive factor in this. And I think they played in a way that sort of tried to. Maybe that's what the contested marks. There was a lot more kicking to contest. I think they were playing a lot. They were trying to control the tempo of the game. There's a question later about Goody's sort of coaching style, and so I'll pick up on that more. But he's brilliant at coaching to control momentum, and I think we looked to save energy wherever we could. We probably kicked to more contests, which would help explain why we had so many contested numbers. There's absolutely no doubt that 5 days. I've been looking at this for a long time because of my punting in terms of marrying up the difference in breaks between teams. Now it's in punting when you can bet the line, it's a really big factor. When a team has an additional day rest, anything under 7, over 7 doesn't matter. Anything under 7 days is any additional day is a massive advantage. Yes, Adelaide had to come back from Perth, but that still had an extra day to recover. The athletic and aerobic demands on these players is just insane. And you saw, to me, it was absolutely no surprise at all that Clary had a down game, because he's exactly the sort of player who's going to struggle to come back after a 5-day break. He had an interrupted pre-season. Same with Benny Brown. I just looked at Benny Brown's time on ground. He had the lowest other than Woe, and he only had 70% time on ground. That's because he's coming off a limited pre-season. The same for Pets. So it absolutely has a massive factor. And as I've banged on about for a long time, I think one of the most underrated, one of the biggest factors in football now is fitness. For me, and it's not discussed in the media, fatigue is a function of fitness. And I use this analogy of playing golf. Whatever standard golf you are, run 100 metres and then try to drive a ball and see how you go. The players with the best technique will be able to still manage driving the ball. Fatigue exacerbates poor technique. So I think that, I've been banging on about this for ages, to get better players, kicking skills in, more players with better kicking skills into the team will address some of the issues of fatigue. But yeah, so absolutely had a big factor, which is why I was so thrilled with the win. Like that was a fantastic win because of that factor. 5 days is a ridiculous. Now we've got one more for the season. We back up for 5 days from the Cats game into the Blues game, and I personally think it's ridiculous. I just think the AFL should not. It ruins the product. The game is too intense physically. Aerobically, there'd be no players other than Wowie who wouldn't have run more than 10 kilometres in that game. And we talked last week, Langers runs 15 plus kilometres each game. 5, even without the sort of getting knocked and hit and bumped and all of that stuff, running 15 kilometres and then backing up and running another 15 kilometres 5 days later, is a pretty tall order. And so, yeah, absolutely was a big factor. I think they planned for this for a long time. It was brilliantly executed. It is a huge thing to ask the club to do. So that's just, for me, that was a huge factor, a huge reason why I was so pleased with the win and how they played and their obvious focus on getting through this game.
I'm sure Wowie would have been made to run as well to get his required.
Yeah, he would have got those kilometres up. And
Yep.
just before George goes, that thing about that's where it's interesting, the expected score, because in fact our expected score was okay, because we from set shots we were in fact bang on. Our expected score was exactly what we got. 0.4 was the difference between our real score and the expected score, and we were only 7.7 down from our general ground ball shots or our general play shots. So it was only 7.5 points less than what our score was. So again, we were actually pretty accurate. So 10-18, that's why that number is good. So it's a better way of thinking expected score is not to think, oh, we would have won if we got expected score. It's a better way of just thinking of it in terms of accuracy, because in fact, the number says 10-18, but it's misleading. That number's misleading because there were a couple of rushed in there, and our expected score was almost bang on what we actually scored. So, and theirs was, I think, 17 down. So, we win that game on we have more points on them by 8 points. So, we were actually relatively accurate. It was just that we were brilliantly accurate last week. And as I said last week, that's not a fluke, that's skill. And it was apparently quite swirly. I've heard that it was quite swirly and quite tricky wind conditions, but to one end.
I think the other point to make is don't concentrate on the 10-18 because Adelaide kicked 8-15. They were in the same boat as us, effectively. That the 6-day break, they're under pressure as well. They're tired, they're fatigued. Don't expect great accurate scores like we saw against Port the previous week. It's when you're fatigued, you just don't get those general play goals that get the majors. Even when you're kicking for goals from a set shot, it's the more fatigued you are, the less likely it is to go through.
Exactly.
And that affected both sides just as equally. But during this game, in the last quarter particularly, I was thinking, might be only 18 points or 21 points or something halfway through the quarter. Adelaide were never going to kick that much.
No,
it was just, it wasn't that they were going to come back flying with a wet sail like we saw in a few other games in this round. Adelaide were never close to it. So we were well and truly home. As far as kicking practice, kicking goals straight, it's all about practice. It's as simple as that. Just practice. And the fitness necessary, particularly in the later points in the game, but it's all about practice. The guys who kick the most goals, the leading goal kickers in the AFL. You look at the Locketts, you look at the Lloyds, you look at the Dunstalls. All had great technique. People like JVR that we see at the moment, Fritsch, have all got great have all got great technique. That's why they keep getting so accurate, but it comes from practice. They are naturally skilled in the first place. It always helps, but it's practice.
And you can see, George, the value of your forwards having that sort of good technique. As I said, we were bang on for accuracy from set shots. Fritter had no influence on the game whatsoever in the first half. You couldn't even be sort of say, well, he defensively kept someone, because he didn't. He didn't really have any. But his first opportunity was that one I mentioned before. It's 45 metres out the back. Oh, no, sorry. His first goal that he got, not the Clary one, was 45 metres out, was a sort of carbon copy almost of the one against Port, where it never looked like missing. It probably would have hit the dot between the two goals, and it was all technique. He kept it low, thought through it, and similarly, Cossie's goal, that banana, which really hurt Port, because they were trying so hard and they were throwing their forces forward. That was a beautiful technique. He didn't think about doing anything else. He didn't think about playing on. He set up right from the get-go with the banana and completely flushed it. our kicking up forward, I thought it was excellent. And it's interesting. I don't know what you guys thought about Billings' games, but I thought his kick were brilliant. The way a couple of times he set our forwards up with exactly the sort of kick that I'm always been complaining about in the last few years, that we have so few players who seem to be able to do it, is to kick to the forwards' advantage. So the one that JBR marked, where Brown, he ended up getting the 50 metres and Brown sort of gave him a block. That was such a great kick by Billings, because it got out the back of the contest and made it impossible for the Crows' defence. But it's exactly that kick that we've missed in the last 2 or 3 years, that falls short and gets intercept marked. So, it was... Fatigue definitely plays a factor, but the stronger the technique, the more able players are to not let it affect their accuracy and their kicking.
Bigfoot says, the pod has gone to another level this season, gents. How magnificent and gutsy was Stephen May in the first quarter with those 3 intercept marks? Were you a little worried after the first 1 or 2 when he pulled up a little gingerly? I really hope we didn't bring him back too soon from what looks like a painful injury, and it potentially has long-term implication. Bush Demon asks, is Stephen May the best player we have ever recruited from another club? And Joe Boy replied to him saying, he's a great pickup, but Brett Lovett from Hawthorn was a beauty too. So I thank the footy gods daily for the gift of Stephen May, battered and bruised, nursing 2 broken ribs and a cracked vertebrae. I felt it every time he hit the deck. It pains me just looking at him in the first quarter when he's adjusting the protective padding, and just so much bravery with every single intercept mark that he took in defence. George, were you a little worried in the first quarter when Bigfoot said he pulled up gingerly after a few of those marking contests that perhaps brought him back in too soon? And then you could answer Bush Demon's questions about whether he's the best recruit from another club. His mate Jake Lever doesn't go too badly either. And judging by the boos that Lever gets from 7 years after he's left the Crows, that Crows fans know just what they lost.
I wasn't worried at all. I wasn't a little bit worried. I was a lot worried. It was when... I sort of had a replay of that actual first incident against Tex. Tex got him under the arm before the contest, and then most people looked at it when he fell down to the ground and thereafter. But there was an elbow straight under the armpit for the very first one. It was totally incidental to the contact, but boy, If Stephen May is feeling that, I would have been carted off on the medical trolley if that had happened to me. So, the thing about broken ribs, and again, I'm not the medical expert. People like Webber and that who are on Demonland. Once your ribs are broken, you can't do anything other. You can barely. They used to strap them. I think in years gone by, they've given up on that. They just take time. But things don't get any worse, apparently. I'm no expert, but I can see the pain on Stephen May's face when he does get hit in that area. But against someone like Tex Walker, that was a superb display, and not just to hold his position, but then those intercept marks at critical times
in that first quarter when they were throwing everything.
Putting your arms up in the air with broken, that was something special. So
knowing that contact can come at any time.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. As for better players, you'd be hard pressed to find someone tougher and harder and things like that. Don't forget about Jake Lever. He was a pretty good pickup that we got from Adelaide. And when you've got a full-back in Stephen May and a centre half-back in the old parlance in Jake Lever, there's also a not bad winger that we picked up from Fremantle running up and down. But the thing is, we've got them, all 3 of them, in the team at the same time. Which is critical, and a real credit to the recruiting team and the list management team to have 3 players of that quality, of that supreme quality, in playing in the side at the same time, having come from other clubs.
I thought May, it was massive from a couple of levels. One, just as you said, how strong he was. It was really that first quarter. Those 3 intercept marks he took in the first quarter were key, obviously, to stopping them scoring. So that they're obviously important from that perspective. But I thought the other aspect was the psychological aspect of it, because everyone knew that he was coming into the game with broken ribs, and he outpointed, their big gun forward, Walker, 3 times. To me, that the Adelaide crowd, they always talk about it, is to suck the energy out of the Adelaide crowd. And I thought Goody, as I've talked about, he manages momentum really well. And one of the benefits of that is that it was only in that last quarter when they sort of got a goal and at 15 points that the energy of that crowd got up. Otherwise, they felt it was it was a super quiet game otherwise. And I thought May was a big factor in that, the way he just monstered Walker, I thought, outplayed him. And then the other bit of play that he did was, and I can't remember, I think this might have been maybe the third quarter, but it was just a fantastic bit of play to get back and stop a goal that, it would have really given them some momentum. And he sprinted back and he timed his punch to get it right on the line, which, would have involved him twisting his back. And, so he would have been in a world of pain. The funny thing, when he took that first mark against Walker on the wing, and he got up and he was sort of obviously in pain. He was so obviously in pain. It was BT, he's the worst caller I've ever heard, says, so I can't remember the exact words, but he says, I think he might be in some bother. It was like, what are you talking about? He's coming back with broken ribs, and he's got up and he's like, you didn't even need to know that he had broken ribs to the pain he was so evidently in. So fantastic performance from Maisie. And I wasn't surprised he was brought back at all, because I'm sure Maisie would have been demanding to be brought back in. As for whether he's the best recruit, I was thinking this through a little bit. Well, you need some criteria. My personal favourite is Carl Dittrich, because growing up, having him come back to Melbourne, or come to Melbourne, and I just loved that he could throw his weight around, and he was someone that it was fun to go watch play, and he was always there for the players that he was skipper of. But then, quality-wise, when I was thinking about it, well, it has to be someone who's got All-Australian, because May's got how many All-Australian?
2, yeah.
2 at Melbourne. So then I tried to think who would fit that category. And Peter Moore came to mind. He didn't make All-Australian at Melbourne. He made All-Australian in 79 when he was at the Pies, but he did win a Brownlow at Melbourne. So pretty impressive, I think. But the one that really, I think, was right up there, and I'd say at this stage is probably slightly ahead of Maisie, is Jeff White. Jeff White did make All-Australian playing for the D's. He played, 230 odd games for Melbourne. Was fantastic. In some ways was sort of revolutionised ruck work for, a fair bit. And I mean, you could also throw Steins in there as well. He's not quite from another club; he's from another country. He did play Gaelic footy, but Jeff White would be right up there, I think, in terms of. I think he played for Victoria. Jeff White,
yeah,
certainly Peter Moore did. So yeah, but he'd be definitely up there, wouldn't he, Maisie?
Yeah. What about Brian Wilson?
No.
No, not even with a Brownlow?
Well, you won a Brownlow, but you couldn't put him in Maisie or Jeff White or bloody lucky to win a Brownlow. You're right. That was back in the day when you didn't need to win 12 games to win a Brownlow. You could, fortunately for us.
Well, Jeff White played one game for Victoria and was All-Australian in 2004.
Yeah. So, yeah, he would definitely be right up there. And he was a number 1 draft pick, and I think Maisie was, number 3 or something? He was pretty high, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So similar sort of, starting points.
Maisie was... It doesn't have it here. Anyway, all right. Let's move on. Judd McVee. We first have a voicemail from Demon Princess.
This is from the Demon Princess. Great show, guys. Love your work. How good is Judd McVee? Good night.
Now, he did say Judd McVee. I had to listen to it a few times. It sort of cut out a little bit, but he was saying how good's Judd McVee. And I think Demon Princess refers to his calling in on behalf of Demon Princess, who's too shy to call in. Mandy Lorian also asks, how good was Judd Silky McVee's first quarter? 7 intercept possessions in that quarter alone and 10 for the match. Thought he did a good job on Rankine. Do you think he'll get the gig on Charlie Cameron this week? Love the nickname. This is me now. I love the nickname of Silky that Maisie dubbed him in the post-match interview with the original Silk Sean Burgoyne. Judd, another master stroke in recruitment from Jason Taylor. Rookie draft, VFL flag, debuted in 2023, and he's probably one of the first picked each week now. Really such an important player in this team with his role of small defender. He's ably filling in the shoes of those that came before, Nev Jetta and Michael Hibbard. 11 first quarter disposals, 20 touches for the match, 10 intercept marks, 10 intercept possessions, 4 marks, and 4 score involvements. Big man, Judd McVee. We've been full praise of McVee since he first played those few practice matches last season, and the plaudits continued throughout 2023 and he's seamlessly continued into this year. Your thoughts on his game, and do you expect him to get the task on Charlie Cameron this week?
Oh, he's getting all the big tasks week in, week out, isn't he? Rankin, as I mentioned before, I thought he gave Rankin a bath. That first quarter was so, I mentioned May's first quarter. I mean, his first quarter was just bananas. I think from memory, he had 11 touches in that first quarter. Did you say that just before?
Yeah, 11 touches. I think he had
7 intercepts, I think, in the first quarter too.
Yeah. And as Brian Taylor kept saying, 100% disposal efficiency. Brian, I got it the first time. What I was most impressed with in that first quarter, it was like I mentioned it last week about Windsor, but McVee has that quality of time where he doesn't look like he gets rushed. I really think, this halfback football that, I've been talking about and that everyone's talking about, it's really dependent on high quality players in the back half with good foot skills. And I think, and it's interesting because Dacos has gone to the back to halfback flank for the Pies because, they're really struggling to move it from the back half. He's playing with him in the midfield. They struggle. He's our Dacos, McVee. But he's different to Dacos. Dacos never really was accountable for a player. I mean, McVee's accountable for the opposition's best medium forward every week. He'll probably get Dusty against he'll get Cameron, then he'll get Dusty potentially, or maybe Howes might get Dusty. But, he might even get Bolton against the Tigers, for instance. That's how the sort of skill he's got. And there was one bit of play in that first quarter. I thought, oh my God, this guy's got something that is really hard to sort of, replicate or train, or where he sort of ducked back and allowed the traffic to go the opposite direction. I don't know if you remember the play, but it was just such a clever bit of play where, and he went lateral, and it was just a 20-meter kick. He hit the target, and we swapped and went out the other side of the ground. That's the sort of class is it can't be taught. I think he's really becoming quite confident as well. He's growing into his game. What was interesting about that game, so there was a lot of focus on how good he was, and he got coaches' votes. 90%, 95% disposal efficiency for his 20 disposals. But check this for his 4 games. So he's 5 games so far. He had 20 games against Sydney, and Sydney, in fact, was his best game play rating was 12.3. This was 11.1 this game. He probably got a big chunk of that in that first quarter. So for context of how good Nibbler's game last week was, he was 21, 22. So if you think how well Judd McVee played in this game, he had 11 points. So, but he had against Sydney, he had 20 kicks, disposals, I should say. Against the Dogs, he had 20. Against the Hawks, he had 20. Against Porty was down, he had 10. But in this game, 20. So that's pretty remarkable consistency. 4 of the 5 games he's played this season, he's had 20 disposal. And his lowest disposal efficiency is 80%. 2 games, the Hawks game and this game, his disposal efficiency was 95%. 416 metres gained in this game. Against the Bullies, he had 419, but 416 is almost his season high. And I'd be guessing 200 of that would have been in the first quarter. I think he was really critical to us winning this game because, partly because he shut down Rankin, partly because his intercept was so. What'd you say, George? He had in that first quarter 7
intercepts, I think. Yeah,
I mean that's super important. But two, again, that psychology of of shutting down one of their best players, just like May did on Walker. And who is he? Who's this McVee? So I think he's quickly become one of our most important players, which is incredible given the quality we've got down back. And I really like the sort of way he waxes with Howes. They have a similar sort of skill set, I think, and they seem to have good synergy together as well. So he's still got another 2-3 years away from his peak as a footballer, and he'll get a little bit better, McVee. So I think we've got a beauty on our hands with him.
I really liked it was the kick that he did to Chandler when Chandler lined up from right virtually on the boundary and nailed it.
Yeah,
McVee intercepted that sort of in the middle of the ground, and everybody was getting ready for the kick to the top of the goal square, and he's kicked that sideways over the top of the Adelaide player. Yep. Absolutely nailed it, and just brilliant to watch. He created that goal effectively, because if it had gone to the top of the square as the usual, contest, maybe we'll get something out of this, but that guaranteed it. It was just superb kick.
And two things that spot on, George. The three things. One, it was a really critical time. And then, of course, Chandler went back and flushed it from the boundary. So another brilliant set shot kick. So one, it was a critical time. Two, he has that skill that only the very best kicks have. And I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, like Goulden, for instance, is to change his mind mid-kick, it looks like. And you're right, he looked like he was going to go long, but then he saw Chandler and he was able to sort of kick it on slightly on the outside of his boot to get it to Chandler. But the third thing that I loved about that is that it looks simple. So you think, oh, well, AFL footballers should be able to find a guy by himself, 9 times out of 10, but we just don't. We're 50% over the journey with that kick, and that's the one that breaks everyone's heart. That's what when you hear people talk connection and all of that baloney, what they're actually meaning is that kick hits a target. When you lose this magical connection, that kick doesn't hit a target, and that's where Crow's problem was. The Crow's problem wasn't inaccuracy, is that they had about 4 similar kicks that they stuffed up from outside 50, inside 50, that we were able to intercept and take the ball off them. So yeah, George, spot on. That was a brilliant kick, I thought.
And that's why you need elite kicks.
That's why you need elite kicks.
Not everyone can do what you just said. Is change your mind almost mid kick or mid just before you're about to kick it.
And also have the vision that George notes. Like so many players are tunnel vision. They go, oh, okay, I've already made the decision to kick to the top of the square. Yeah, and he's got that time, and he's going to be poised. You'd think that he's a 200 game player.
Yes. Master Chief says our defence was once again rock solid, and at this point we don't expect anything less. Tommy Mack's resurrection in defence has been a revelation. In particular, his intercept, contested marking down the line is exactly what we need to allow Petty to swing forward. Always been a big fan of T-Mac from his early career as a defender to his swing forward, where he was instrumental during our entire premiership season. Not going to lie, I thought his last foot injury would be the end of him, and I absolutely wrote him off after last year's final series, but he has risen. Leave It to Diva asks, why has T-Mac improved so much? Is it easier to defend and then play? Is it easier to defend than to play forward? So I agree that our defence was solid. The intercept numbers speak to that. We said McVee 11, May 6, Lever 6, McDonald and Howes 4, Rivers 2, and not all scores from turnover are generated from defence, but I think we did score 40 points from turnover up to 3/4 time, and the score involvement from our defenders is impressive too. Rivers 6, May 5, McVee 4, Salem and Howes 3, T-Mac 2, Lever 1. So it's been a renaissance for T-Mac back in a role of defence. George, thoughts on T-Mac? And if you can answer, Leave It to Diva's question, where has the improvement come from? Most of us wrote him off last year when he returned from injury to the forward line. Is it easier to defend and play forward? It's probably a hard one to answer for us hacks watching from the stand.
There's a couple of things in there. We spoke about it briefly last week. T-Mac when he was last down the back line, was basically the sole decent defender we had. We had Oscar down there as well, but really, when he's been operating with a group of players like the Levers and the Mays alongside him with really talented, good kicking smalls as well, let's call them smalls, like Salem, McVee, Rivers, it took all the pressure off T-Mac to perform like, he was the person who got into trouble trying to bring the ball out of defence when he was last down there.
He was a distributor, and now he doesn't have to be.
Now he doesn't have to be, yeah. So what really struck me about this game, like I said, I watched the game on a replay as well. And it started out because I was wondering, what in the hell is Jake Lever doing in the middle of the ground taking intercept marks? Then I realised, hang on, Stephen May's in the middle of the ground taking intercept marks. And then Tommy Mack was in the middle of the ground taking intercept marks. And it was remarkable to watch the rotation. It was almost like a half-court press in basketball. The rotation of these big three in particular, moving up the ground, but not just staying there. They weren't following a particular man. Sometimes they were on Tex Walker's, next time was on Rank, and the next time was on Fogarty. But it was the way that the zone defence worked, and T-Mac worked beautifully within that zone defence, and it was a real pleasure to watch the interaction between those three bigs, but obviously the rest of the players like the Salems and the McVees and the Howes are working in the background doing their bit as well. But it was like watching a beautiful piece of music in play. They were doing it just so well, and I'll be looking for it more in the game. But what I was really surprised was how far up the ground we were moving with these players. It wasn't just collapse it down to the 50. They were actually attacking Adelaide from the midfield and denying them. And when Adelaide's really depended on the Tex Walkers to take a mark in the forward line, when they're not even getting down the forward line in the first place, it wasn't surprising what happened. So, the defenders are doing a great job. T-Mac's fitting in beautifully. I thought he'd be in the same position, particularly with all his foot injuries pre-season. But he's running well. He's performing well. He's not slow, which certainly when he was having the foot problems towards the end of the season, he was really struggling to get any pace up. But now he's really right in the contest when he needs to be. So, it's great. It's a great renaissance for us and for him as well.
And I think you hit the nail on the head right then, George. He remarkably, he looks fit and agile. He's moving, quick as quickly as he did in 21. It seems to me he took a fantastic mark on the wing. That's such an interesting point you make, George, about that rotating of those three talls. That's what I said a few weeks ago about Tomo. That's why I think he's not in and T-Mac is, because I'm not knocking Tomo here, but like he hadn't played in a system like that. I just think it requires quite a lot of football IQ, not to say that Tomo doesn't have that, but to be able to do what you just described is a pretty sophisticated thing, knowing when to tag and take to go up with the walker or to go back or, to wax with the other talls to be the marking option or to prevent the oppo marking down the line is, it takes quite a skill. And I mean, it's easy to forget the only reason he was pushed forward wasn't because he wasn't a good defender. It was because his kicking was so terrible from the back half that he kept on turning the ball over. Maybe, Goodwin was trying to implement the zone then and he struggled and we needed a forward as well. But he was our best key defender he was our best key defender when they threw him forward. So, he's got the chops down back. He played for the majority of his career as defender. So it's no surprise. I mean, I haven't played enough footy, but what you hear is that, defence is a bit easier in some respects than forward, which is probably a good thing to think of in terms of JVR because the ball's coming at you and you can position yourself. But just on that point you made, George, which I think is a good one about the way they rotate and don't have a sort of set player, is that if you compare the way Adelaide were setting up in that second half and the way Port do, the back defensive line's like a flat line. Ours is like a triangle or a diamond. We never get scored out the back, or very rarely get out the back. It's like, and then we play teams where you think, how does Fritter get out the back with no one? He's 40 metres from goal and there's no one between him and the goal. How does he engineer an open? And that's an open goal. That rarely happens to us. It happened once in that game where it got out the back, where Walker marked and handballed onto a fella running into an open goal, but that was it. And that wasn't really an out the back one. So that doesn't happen without those tools, knowing when to go back, when to go forward, without McVee. And there always has to be that goalkeeper. I think that's the hallmark of Goody's defensive system almost. They're all team defence, but also always having that goalkeeper deep. He's been terrific, T-Mac, and super important, really, hasn't he?
Mm-hmm. The other thing that T-Mac brings to the defence is he's a contested mark. It's not just intercept. He actually takes contested marks, which are critical.
And he took a really important one that was just at a time where, that's what I meant about the controlling. I think we kick marked a lot more, but that was on defense to stop them transitioning. Just on the defense, sorry, Andy, that if this week's first crack was really interesting, was relatively uninteresting, except for this one bit. And Joey Montagna's been a huge Demon fan this year. I'm loving it. I'm just loving it. But he showed footage, which I would watch all day, every day if I could, of down the ground, and he was making exactly the point. So anyone interested in, I thought about clipping it up, but without the visuals, it wouldn't work so well. But he describes exactly what we do in terms of our all-team defense and shows that movement of the grid, and he doesn't talk to this point exactly, but on that footage it shows how we set up in that sort of diamond shape where we've always got our the deepest defender. We rarely let any a forward behind that last person, where it seems to be every other team often has a player a forward behind that last defender.
And from that, we take out that Ben Man's watching more media again.
Yes.
Well, first crack is my crack football. So.
Right.
Just on T-Mac, he had 9 or 10 possessions at 100% disposal efficiency. So the rumours of his inaccuracy by foot.
It was never inaccurate. He just would take crazy Hollywood kicks to the corridor
because he had to in those days.
Yeah, as we mentioned. So. Do you think our defence, and we're always set up so well, teams sort of get the ball and they stop and they allow us to set up, whether it's because we're already set up and they stop and they slow play. But do you think if a team can get the opportunity to just take us on continually, that's the way to beat the Ds? They often say that is. Are you worried about that? That a team like Carlton who move the ball fast or try to.
Well, they are now this year. Carlton have been following Melbourne's model, but now they're basically doing what Melbourne are doing. I mean, we talked about this last year and the year before. Collingwood basically implemented a method to beat our method, which was move it from the halfback flank. You remember the first sort of 10 games of 22 where we couldn't, get beaten, and Port, remember, tried to basically hold the ball for the entire match. And it was clear that really the only way to beat us was to go fast from the halfback flank, which is what's triggered this back half movement. So I think yes is the answer. That's the way to beat our zone. That's the way to beat any zone is fast ball movement. It's the same in basketball. But I just keep saying that our defensive system is so much better than any other system. It's so, it takes years to develop, and he's been doing it for 8 years or 6 or 7 years to develop it. So it's, they're doing this without thinking almost. They all know where each other is. And there was an amazing stat just on our defense, and it really speaks to Goody's philosophy, basically. I'll just bring it up. I took a photo of it on first crack on my phone. So hold on. Where is it? Note to self. So maybe I didn't take it on phone, but they had back to the beginning of 2020. This was Montagna again, and I'm going to get these numbers wrong. Is the number of times the top 6 teams or whatever had scored 100, the opposition had scored 100 points or more against them. Right, so back to the beginning of 20. So it's like, I think it was 100 games or 98 games of football in that period of time. Only 3 times in that period has a team scored 100 points more than us. And I forget now, I'll find it was on my phone, but the next one was 12 or 15 or something, or 10 or something. So only 3 times in the last 3 full seasons plus these games has a team scored more than 100 points against us, which is just nuts. That's just crazy.
Yeah, didn't Maisie say that they don't want more than 70 kicked against?
Well, 70 was, I reckon it's gone back down to 60.
60, yeah. Went
Yeah.
up 2023 maybe up to 70. But nope. All going good. Let's move on. Red Jacket says Clary had a relatively quiet game, but was involved in some crucial contests in the last. Perhaps his hand injury is hampering him. Viney was sick during the week, and he too had a relatively quiet game. But how good was our big bull Petracca? He's having a ripper season. I have a cheeky pineapple on him for the Brownlow. Sparrow was solid too after a quiet start to the season. So the bull was on parade once again. 29 possessions, 15 contested, 10 score involvements, 8 clearances, 7 inside 50s and a goal. And how good was the lead up to the goal that he kicked with the excellent 1%er smother from Sparrow? Big man Track, he was fantastic again this week, wasn't he?
Well, I feel like it's sort of you can just repeat from the first 4 games. I think a big factor is he looks incredibly fit. And he is incredibly fit. And look, you can see the difference between Clary doesn't look anywhere near as fit as Track. And I'm amazed at Clary. I'm just blown away, to be honest, because there's some footage, like you can see against Port, he was in the change rooms without his jumper on, and he's carrying a little bit of condition, is Clary.
You can see he's got a bit of a dad bod, it looks like.
Well, I wouldn't say, oh, Jesus, if that's a dad bod, I would be...
Or a footballer, that's what I mean.
For that.
Not fat shaming.
He's got to be playing to the level he's playing. And even in this game, he was clearly struggling. But like, for instance, that ability to read that play and shark it in the midfield and set up that goal to Fritter, that is just elite level IQ. And I really think he's playing Gus's role. He's the one that they're putting behind the ball almost as the defensive defender. And he's just making really good decisions. So even, I reckon, he was knackered in this game. He played through the whole game. The other one mentioned then in that question was Sparrow. He had just a few more minutes time than Benny Brown, only 70%, just a touch over 70% time on ground as well. And it probably speaks to what George has spoken about a lot over the last couple of seasons, is using the time on using the bench to have players come on and be like a weapon for 15 minutes of power. And I think that's where his best footy is, Sparrow, is when he can really, impact the game physically. That smother was just fantastic. And if you watch that replay, so if you watch all the goals and watch that replay, the other thing that jumped out for me was that from that goal was Track kicked a beauty on his left foot, maybe?
Yeah, left
foot, no time, kicks it straight through. Multiple players run to celebrate. They all went to Sparrow. Yeah. Like Maxi was there. He went straight to Sparrow, and it was like that's like just shows you, doesn't it? That sort of whole attitude of this team is we're going to celebrate the person who did the smother, not the person who did the brilliant goal. I'm sure they gave.
Well, Track was the first one to go to Sparrow. He knew.
That's right.
Where the goal came from.
But look, Track has been bananas, and one of the things that David King has been talking about a lot is how much football he gets forward of centre. And he's been saying that you got to put some time into players like him and Heaney and others. And I don't know how you put time into a player like Tracker. How on earth what would you do? How would you tag him? Like, he's too strong. He's like he's just immense this season.
It was interesting. I was trying desperately to see what Oliver's hand looked like with the glove. I think from the looks of things, I think he's actually got a broken finger, which is taped together to another finger, and he's got some strange arrangement with the glove that he's wearing. I think the problem is for Oliver at the moment, where he's so limited simply because he's operating with 3 fingers on one of the hands. So we noticed, or the commentators noticed, that he had something like 6 kicks to 1 handball. Well, that's completely the opposite of what Oliver is usually doing with his hands. His hands are so critical. But so let's hope over the progression of the season. I mean, there's not like ribs, perhaps you can't do much about a broken finger, but it's limiting his his output considerably, but his level of output's still pretty damn good compared to most other players.
Exactly. And the other thing he did a couple of, which it might have been a combination of fatigue, it also might be his hand, is that the commentators noted as well, is that he kicked the ball off the ground a couple of times where he would ordinarily pick the ball up.
Yeah.
But I'm amazed at what he's putting out. He looks like a suburban footballer carving it up at AFL level.
Yep.
D Old Fart says, really looking forward to the pod to keep us company on the long haul across the hay plain from Adelaide to Canberra. Thanks in advance, guys. Some of Billings' tackling/pressure versus Adelaide was not in keeping with the Melbourne DNA. On the other hand, we have seen that his ball use can add an important touch of class in the area where we need it. Is this an acceptable trade-off? If not, what is the answer? We've also got a voice message from our good mate Salty.
Boy, Salty here. I left you for 2 weeks, but thought I'd give you a call. Obviously, had 2 fantastic wins in Adelaide. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how you think Billings is going so far. I think he's had a game or two he's been okay, but probably could have had 2 this last game, and whether he holds his spot. It sounds like Hozzy might get a week, but if he doesn't, would you put in Hunter over Billings, or are you happy to persist with Billings for the time being? That's all. So I think Judd McVee had an amazing last game as well. I'm sure you're going to give him lots of kudos. But yeah, what a find. What a player. I wouldn't mind seeing him on the wing or half forward in the nibble role. Anyway, looking forward to hearing the pod.
Well, we talked about Judd McVee, but we might touch on whether you think he could play on the wing in a sec. But, George, I've seen lots of people knocking Billings after 2 relatively quiet weeks. However, I reckon if he'd nailed 2 or 3 of the behinds, we might be having a bit of a different conversation about him.
Yeah, that's exactly it when it all boils down. What was disappointing, not the fact that he didn't nail them, but they were both relatively easy shots. Yeah. And for someone who exhibits good kicking qualities, that was unusual.
And he had time.
He had heaps of time for 2 of those. Yeah. So I think the feeling is that Billings should be producing a lot more than what he has to date, and it'll be ultimately with Hunter, I believe, being available this week, he might be the logical replacement, but it's hard to say because we're not the insiders. We don't know what they're actually working on, whether Hunter is totally fit at this stage. It's difficult to understand.
We don't know his conditioning either. He
exactly.
might
Exactly. I think the important thing is, 4 weeks ago we would have said, Caleb Windsor, he's too young to be running as a winger all this time. He's absolutely locked in there, one of the positions on the other side of the ground, and the Billings is providing rotation, I think, with Langdon and Windsor, but I don't think Windsor's going anywhere fast. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this week with Hunter or not. I really don't have the answer.
It was interesting. There was a bit of criticism on Demon Land about Billings' game. And I didn't think his game was that bad, actually, like as you said. And if you're taking his chances and suddenly, then suddenly it's a strong game. Yeah. And it's a bit hard to tell as, we've had this conversation about a number of players in the last 3 years or so when so much of their role is how many kilometres they cover defensively. A player can have very low numbers, but be playing their role, in the defensive system that Goody wants them to. I think the criticism of him is the same criticism that George has flagged that he had at St Kilda, which is defensively, he's maybe not the best defensive player, but we knew that. We got him in knowing that, and we got him in to be a distributor. Having said all of that, so I thought maybe he didn't play as poorly as what people suggested. I'm just looking at his numbers here, though. As I noted last week, that player rating is a pretty good measure, actually. His best game so far was the game against the Hawks. So for context, he scored 10.3 points in that game. His player rating was 10.3 points in that game. And the week before against the Doggies, he was 8.8. In this game, he was 2.5. So, that's a pretty big drop off, and his disposal efficiency was 64%. So, a good night for footy, you'd want him to be kicking a bit better than that. So, look, I don't think he'll get dropped. I can't, I think it's a bit, as I said, it's a bit hard to tell because you don't know what his key indicators are and what his role specifically is. But my sense from watching and even on the replay was that he didn't play as badly as what some had suggested, though that player rating isn't that brilliant.
Old Man Rivers says, Demon Young Guns, just incredible drafting over the last 4 years. Firstly, Cozzy, Riv Dog, Bowie, pre-premiership, and now the second wave is just as impressive. Judd, Silky McVee, JVR, Blake Howes, and the smooth-moving Caleb the Duke Windsor, all making a serious contribution in 2024. Just sensational vision from Jason Taylor. Do you think Colton Tolstrup will have the same instant impact when we unleash him later in the season? So, Big Man, you must be impressed with our young guns. You've said it already tonight. Who have saddled up and are making significant contributions. Most of them, they're in their first or second seasons and slotting into their roles just like 50 gamers, 100 gamers. It's just incredible.
Absolutely, and it's what I said in the season preview is that what people aren't, crediting when people were. David King, for instance, predicted we wouldn't make the 8. I mean, that just looks ridiculous now, let's be frank. And the general consensus was, on Demon Land, you'd put all of those different predictions. It was a bunch of football commentators and so-called experts who didn't have us finishing top 4. I'd say more didn't have us finishing top 4. None seemed to have us playing off in the grand final. And one of my pushbacks about that, as I raised on the podcast, was no one's crediting the fact that the scope for improvement in players like McVee, let alone Howes hadn't even played a senior game, is already a lock in our best 23. The scope for improvement of Cozzy, the scope for improvement of Chandler, of Rivers. We've still got players who haven't even made the senior side, like the Colt, who's got enormous upside. We've got Windsor, who's in his 5th game of footy. He's as exciting as he is. He's already a super important player to our structure. So I just found that all quite bizarre, as if we're static and we're not going to improve. And Taylor can, he's a big factor in that. And I don't even know, I didn't actually open it up, but there was a thread on Demonland saying we'd re-sign Taylor. I presume that means him.
Oh, was there? I didn't see that. That's nice.
So I just think that those young players are a massive factor in terms of where you just compare Melbourne at the moment to the Pies, like I said at the beginning of the season in the preview, is that we have got a list that looks like a team, looks like what Adelaide's list should look like if they're pushing a team that's about to go to the next step. We've got that, and we've finished top 4 of the last 3 seasons on end, and it's if we get to 6-2, we're better than even money and finishing top 4 again this season, which is incredible consistency of success. And you only need to look at the struggles of Brisbane and Collingwood this season to get a sense of it. And I put a lot of that down to Goody, of course, but I put a lot down to Taylor and the players he's selected. And also it has to be said is, right through my supporting Melbourne, we've been woeful at developing players. Like I can't, so many good players. Jared Healy, he leaves Melbourne, becomes a much better player at the Swans. Maybe that's a bit unfair, but even a player like Wiedemann or Lucas Cook, or we were throwing them into a system and they weren't getting better. Now it's a combination of excellent players that they're selecting, culturally strong players, good citizens, and we're developing them properly, giving them a proper crack at footy, which is why I haven't given up on someone like Jefferson, for instance. Jefferson, the way he's tracking, if he came to Melbourne 15 years ago, that'd be it. He'd be gone to the system probably, but he's a chance because of Taylor and the development system they've put in place. As for the Colt, I mean, he looks like he's got the tools. You guys have seen more of him. He looks like he's got the confidence. He seems to me that one of the advantages he'll bring to it, I reckon if Cozzy doesn't get up, he's a chance of coming in this week. Yep. I think the advantage that Colt has is that he can play inside mid and also as a half forward. I'm not sure what his tank's like, but he could probably play sort of that dynamic half forward role the way that fella from Hawthorn who went forward in the second half.
Hardwick.
Yeah, Hardwick. He's strong. He's low center of gravity. He's got the Lee Matthews sort of stocky build, and he looks like he's got a bit of confidence as well.
You're right about the development side of things. I mean, the fact that Windsor comes in, while he's a high draft pick player, he comes in and he just looks like he's played 50 games. It's not like he's not. He didn't spend the first 25 games down at Casey. He's come straight into the side and just holds it down. And McVee's the same sort of thing. This guy's, he's played 30 games now, but there've been 30 consistent games. I watched a bit of the St Kilda game. There was a kid called Young who was playing who was a high draft pick as well, playing on the wing. He looked all at sea. He really didn't know he was just completely overwhelmed by the game. Super fast, and he's going to obviously have the talent, but he struggled. Whereas the Windsor's come in and he's not struggling by any stretch of the imagination. So,
and McVee's probably an even better example because he was you'd expect Windsor to be good. He was pick 7.
Yep.
McVee was, I'm right in saying he was a rookie pick, wasn't he?
Yes, pick 13 or 16 or 19 or something in the rookie draft.
Yeah, and few people would have picked him as the player who was going to be a best 22 player at the beginning of, say, the 22 season. Yeah. I certainly wouldn't. I mean, I remember we were talking about he might be a player who might get cut. Yeah, of course, he's a rookie. So that's development plus, isn't it? So you can, obviously he, in that fantastic interview you did with him, Andy, like that, he went back with those other WA boys and worked his backside off and got AFL elite fit. Right, so he's done that work to do that, but he's been developed as a halfback flanker to fit within a system, and he's just thriving in that system. And to me, that's just A-grade development.
The other one who's been developed nicely, certainly in over the summer period, is Chandler. That he was a guy who was playing almost permanent sub. Coming back, was he going to be traded? Yes, no. All of a sudden, he's come back in, and he's an integral part of the forward line now, and performing very, very well. So, whatever they gave him over the summer, it was the same story. It's
funny you should mention him because I was watching the replay earlier. It occurred to me when he slotted that goal from the boundary line is that if you'd talked to a lot of Demons fans, say middle of last year, who would you take out of Chandler and Toby Bedford? 80% of fans would have gone Bedford, but I reckon that would be swinging back in Chandler's favour. More and more people would be thinking, actually, we've got a goal kicker here who works up the ground and takes his chances. We need to kick goals. So, yeah, he's a good one in terms of development and sticking with him.
Well, we're going to talk about him right in a moment, but this is the problem with a message board where an old thread can get bumped up. So that thing about Jason Taylor re-signing on a long-term contract was a thread from 2021 that 2 years later someone has brought back in today just to talk about something that Gerard Healy said about the drafting of Judd McVee. And that he's just about the best kick in the competition. So, no, Jason Taylor hasn't re-signed. Someone said they think he comes out at the end of this year or next year. That's one we probably want to re-sign again because
let's sign Jason Taylor up. Just before you go to the next question, Andy, Demon Dynasty in the chat room notes that Howes and T-Mac have the lowest average metres gained of all defenders so far this season, and wonders whether they're under instruction not to bite off more than they can chew with their kicking and passing, which might be a good point for both of them. And he also notes that Clary's rating against the Crows, he has a fantastic system, a player rating system, as I mentioned last week. His rating against the Crows was 65% down on his average 23 home and away rating. So that's a pretty big drop-off. But I think, again, that's fatigue played a big factor in that. And it's amazing, amazing he was effective as he was.
Well, the metres gained is also going to be sort of predicated on how many possessions they get as well. I know T-Mac only had 9 possessions. How many did Howes have? Because if you're going to have low possessions,
And you can't count McVee because
It
he
had nine
plays
as
on
well.
every time and kicks
Well,
out.
McVee had 20 possessions this week, but Houses had 9. And, defenders, it isn't all about possessions because it's, pressure acts and spoiling and,
And as was suggested, you give the ball to come out of defence to people like Salem and Rivers.
Exactly.
Handball it off. Or,
Yeah.
All right, so we have a voicemail from Maddie from Caulfield North regarding Cade Chandler. So I'll play it and then George jump in with your thoughts once it finishes. So we've talked a bit about Chandler, but if you've got anything else to add.
Hey guys, Maddie from Caulfield North here. I just wanted to comment on Cade Chandler's season so far. I think he's fast becoming like a real integral part of this current forward line structure that we got at the moment. And I don't know, he doesn't get spoken about too often. I think in previous years, like the knock on him has been that maybe he wasn't putting enough pressure on, and he seems to, like this season, be racking up the tackles, and he's such a good shot for goal sometimes. And I was looking at the AFL app, and according to that, he's currently number 1 in the competition for max speed. So, yeah, just wanted to think, just what you guys thought on Jim's season so far, and how important he's going to be this week now that Cozzie's out of the side. And the other thing, just wanted to say a quick note that I don't know if you guys saw, but after Clary delivered that inside 50 kick to Fritsch this week, the entire team got around him again and were giving him hugs and pats on the back. Just love to see that from the guys supporting him. And awesome. So, yeah, just thought I'd highlight that too. Love the show. Catch you guys later.
George?
Yeah, not much more to add to that. I think that's one thing that to keep in the back of everyone's mind. I remember years ago we were talking to one of the assistant coaches at Melbourne. It was about James Harms at the time, who said he had all sorts of problems for a start off until he developed the body necessary to play AFL footy, and it usually takes 2 to 3 years to be able to do that. And I think Chandler's also in that getting into that area at the moment. We're just starting to see something come through, but I suspect if Cozzie's not available this week, we're going to be depending a lot more on Cade. But it's also about a confidence game. When you, like I said, when you're spending most of your time as a sub in previous seasons, all of a sudden you're getting the games, you're performing in those games, you feel more confident, and then your output gets even better. And Cade's not going anywhere off the list at the moment, and he'll be staying on the ground for quite a while.
Yeah, I put the asset on him at the beginning of the season in our preview to say, he was really key. I said he was at the crossroads. I think under the question, which player's under the most pressure, I chose him because he's at a point in his career where he's really going to be putting the best foot forward, and we really need, we don't less of those high half forwards. I think we're well set for them now. We need the players closer to goal to take their chances inside 50. And geez, he's just delivered on that. So he's been awesome this season. I mentioned player ratings. Poor game against the Sydney, against the Swans. Only 5 in that game, but then 13 points against the Dogs, 11.4 against the Hawks. Not such a strong game against Port, 7.9, but 11.5 in this game. 80% disposal efficiency, 90%, almost 91% against the Dogs. And he's kicking goals, and important goals, really key goals. So he's now kicked 6 goals for the season, and he kicked the one in this match. But geez, he flushed it, and again, it was a crucial time for that kick. And he's really showing impressive leadership. He's got a good voice, really positive body language. He's become a really important player, and I think he's a small forward. I like him closer to goals. I think he's a really good balance between him and Cozzy. The way they're developing a good synergy. I think he's been fantastic this season so far, and another player who looks fit as a fiddle.
Singer says, I'll echo the sentiments about loving the podcast and really grateful for you guys for all the hard work that you put into it. Do you guys think Cozzy needs to adjust the way that he plays in terms of aggression when bumping? I love the hardness, but he has to learn that if he's going to bump, he can't leave the ground and he absolutely can't lift the elbow. I was hoping that the incident would be graded as low impact, but the late lifting of the elbow probably ruled that out. I hope we appeal to attempt to downgrade it to low impact and maybe he can escape with a fine. By the time you read this on air, you'll probably know whether the club will contest it. However, given the new rules, I doubt Cozzy will get off. It's a shame because the hit was silly and may cost us against the Lions. So Cozzy's received the one-match suspension for his bump on Jake Saligo. The bump was assessed careless, medium impact and high contact. The Ds are appealing the suspension in the hopes that they can downgrade it to low impact and that he can escape with a fine. Big man, does Cozzy need to adjust the way that he plays?
Yeah, it does, I think. I mean, just to be clear, though, this wasn't a bump. So, ironically, it was a smother, attempted smother from a handball. So, it wasn't, they keep talking about him leaving the ground. It's annoying me. He didn't leave the ground to bump. He should absolutely not be doing that. You know, as I've talked about, what positive benefit does that bring? But this wasn't one of those occasions. For me, the issue was he raised the elbow. It was just stupid, I thought. I thought at the time,
well.
I mean, the bump would have been minimal. It was really, if he didn't raise the elbow slightly, then he would have at worst got a fine, I think. But it was silly. He does need to not do it. He missed the first game of this season. Who knows what difference that would have made on a slippery night, because he kicks a couple of early. Maybe we win that game. I don't know. But the point is that he shouldn't be missing games of football. And yes, he needs to. I think Goody sort of mentioned it in his presser, that there's a fine line, and I mean, we ask a lot of these young players and these young men, don't we? We want them to be super aggressive. We want them to attack the footy. We want them to, I'm lauding him for the pressure that he put on earlier, and then we get worried when they cross that line. I was furious. Like, there's this stuff on Demon Land about Raw, him being called a sniper and the dirtiest player in the AFL. It makes me so angry. I cannot begin to tell you how angry that makes me, because I don't think he is a dirty player. He's an aggressive player. He plays not unlike his uncle, Kickett, who is another. There's a player who I loved coming to our club as well from another club. So yes, I think he needs to be smarter. Like in that incident, that was fine. He just didn't need to raise his elbow. I just thought that was silly.
So you're saying he didn't leave the ground. He left the ground, but he left the ground to smother the ball, and then
he jumped to try to interrupt the flight of the handball.
And as he's coming down, he's lifted the elbow to the guys.
Yeah, I just thought it was stupid, and it was almost, to me, it's a bit hard to tell because you see the slow mo, and then it gives a false impression often. But it seemed to me that he instinctively put the elbow out and then realised. Instinctively try to bring it in because he barely touched him. Like Saligo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He was best on ground for the Crows. He was by far their best player. Yeah. He didn't have any ill will. It's like the Smith hit. Like everyone jumps on him for the Smith hit. Every players should want to get hit by him because they go on to be their team's best player. When Bailey Smith was their best player that day, he had no problem. So, it's a fine line. I don't want him to rein in his aggression. Just be smarter about it.
Yeah. You can sort of see, I'm just watching it sort of in slow motion, back to back. It looks like he puts in his elbow to sort of protect himself, but then he sort of just lifts it as he.
Yeah, it didn't do any damage. I mean, to be honest, I think this is stupid. I think this is an absolute. I can't remember if this got changed, but it seemed to me a logical rule would be if you've got form, you double up. What would be 1 week should be 2 weeks if you've got form for doing the same thing. If you want to stamp out head high stuff and there's a player who keeps doing it, just give them, I don't know where that sits at the moment. But I think he's probably fair enough if he doesn't get benefit of the doubt because he has got form, hasn't he?
Yeah. Well, he's been suspended in the last game of the year. He got suspended the first game of last year, and now he's been suspended.
While I think of it as a completely different thingo, but just something that really made me angry was Dermot Brereton suggesting that Clary short-stepped or questioning his courage when he didn't just when Fogarty was running towards him at full steam. What on earth is Brereton talking about? I mean, my God, what did he expect Clary to do? And that's exactly an example of what I mean about footballing. Football needs to change, because what benefit would have he accrued if he'd gone into Fogarty at full speed? He would have been reported. Yeah. Like he would have given away a free kick to Fogarty. He would have risked knocking Fogarty out. He would have been risk getting knocked out for what? To give another player a set shot from the boundary line?
And then all week the focus is on on what a terrible hit on Fogarty by Oliver.
Exactly. And what's he supposed to spoil him with his busted hand? I mean, Brereton is a complete clown. It's a complete clown.
There's something about Brereton later about him hating Melbourne. So we'll move on. Scroll asks, was that the most putrid umpiring performance in a D's game for a long time? And JN02 replied, agreed. I was at the game and thought the umpires were very much influenced by the crowd. It was infuriating, to say the least. So there were 21 free kicks to 9. And as I've been banging on for years about umpiring, it's often the frees that you don't get that the opposition does get that make the gulf in the free kick counts seem even worse. And I'll say for the most part that over the last few years, we've been pretty even at the end of the year in terms of free kick differential. So this game was frustrating because not only were we not getting everything, but nothing was coming our way. And when we did get a free kick, their crowd acted like they'd never received a free kick in their lives, and the umpires had committed a capital offence. So, Giorgio, what are your thoughts on the umpiring in this match?
We'll keep it short. I'm actually glad they imported a lot of the Victorian umpires over to the game, because it would have been even worse had they had the locals in there. What do you do? What do you say? I think we had 2 of the 3 worst umpires in the competition, but they're going to be there next week as well. We got away with it in this game, but I'm always frustrated by the frees that they don't give as opposed to the frees that they do.
Like the one Clary didn't get like in the first minute or 2 of the game. His head got taken off. The commentary that's going on about the Ginnivan situation, that should never have arisen in the first place, but it's because the umpires don't apply the rules. Pay it. It gets too high.
Pay it. Exactly.
Jesus.
Just pay it.
What are you there for?
Yeah, and the thing is, when the umpires start paying these things, people stop doing other things as well. That they know that they'll get away with it. One of the ones that I've noticed in this round is a couple of teams. Geelong do it. Who else does it? Brisbane do it. The man standing on the mark doesn't move because he's been told to stand. They'll position a guy about 5 or 6 metres away.
On the corridor side often.
Who starts moving before the play on call's been made, so that they're already moving in on the player kicking the ball. But the umpires don't see it. They don't call it.
They don't call it. They did initially because you're inside the
zone. Yeah, but coaches have obviously worked it out as well. Here's a way of getting around the stand rule, but the umpires are too silly to see the blindingly obvious when it's right next to them. They're looking at the guy on the mark. They're not noticing the guy who's 5 metres away starting his run as the player's coming in to kick. So, we
have to say we do that all the time, but there was an occasion where the Crows did it to us and almost smothered the ball from the player. I forget who was kicking it. Was kicking inside 50 from, say, the wing, and almost touched the ball. And I was, it should be 50-50, but we do that all the time. We're really disciplined about doing that, actually.
Well, they've got 4 umpires on the field. Why can't one of them look at the guy on the mark and the other one look at the ball and who's around?
No, you're being sensible, Andy.
I'll stop. Spargonicus writes, hi, team. Loving the podcast. This one's from Mrs. Spargonicus, Spargonet. who's a relative newcomer to AFL, having grown up in Sydney and followed that other code. She's an Eels fan. She then transitioned to AFL first as a Swan supporter, and after much cajoling on my part and forcing her to attend many games, she became a fully fledged Demo member. However, I will reveal that our first kiss, a bit too much information, was back in 1997 at the G, watching David Neitz kick 3 in a muddy affair. A loss for the Ds, of course. Anyway, this is her observation, backed up purely by anecdotal evidence. Goody has mentioned in press conferences that at the start of each game, he kind of waits to see what the opposition throws at them and then adapts. Sparganet thinks this may have something to do with our pattern of slow starts, catch up, burst in the third term, and then tiring out in the final quarter to try and withstand a spirited comeback against better sides, obviously, like the 2023 finals. She thinks this might be a less than ideal mindset to enter a match with, in preference to a more positive starting mindset of we're taking this game by the throat or we'll stamp our brand on this game. She knows about our defensive structure game. So, big man, does Sparganet have any merit in her observations? And in regards to what she believes is Goody's wait and see approach, surely that can't be the case.
I think Miss Sparganet has got a better handle on football than literally, no joke, 99% of the football media, because that's a very astute observation and accurate one. And I've talked about this a lot, is that Goody is not given the due he deserves for his tactical nous. And often people, partly because of the shallowness of the analysis of football, everyone, for instance, was talking about the assertive actions of Lyon at the halfway mark to bring St Kilda back into the match, and so often coaches who are regarded as strong tactical coaches, they're regarded like that because they make moves. They put a player on another player. They throw the Hardwick forward. So Mitchell was lauded for throwing a player forward. That's 1970s tactics, is that you put a player in a different position. But what it gets noted is the proactive move. But what Goody doesn't get kudos for is exactly what Miss Sparganet has noted, is that, and I've noted previously as well, is that he is a responsive coach often. Often he will allow the game to look exactly as noted, to see what shape it takes, and then we will respond and respond in different ways. He doesn't tag, he responds to the tag. So that's a good example. Someone decides to tag one of our players, like a Viney. He lets them do that, and then he puts Viney at half forward and drags Drew to the half forward flank. So as opposed to being the pro, so who gets the credit in that situation? Hinkley gets the credit for putting Drew on Viney. Mastermind move. Well, that's a good sort of analogy of Goody's style. Well, then, as we've noted, then he moves that player around. He drags Drew, who's their best clearance player, away from clearances, or one of their best clearance players away from clearances. So he very much does that. I think he's done that more since 21, where he's allowed the game, or they've allowed the game to sort of shape up. At the end of 22, when our fitness was stuffed at the end of the season, we were going hard in the first quarter, and I think to build a winning lead. But outside of that, it's become much more pronounced that, allowing the game to find its shape and then responding. He says it all the time. He says, well, we can play different ways, but I would say it's premised on one thing, and it's premised on the defense. So whatever system they want to do, Goody comes in with a view which is like the anti-Malcolm Blight view. Malcolm Blight used to think, well, we'll score 125 points, we'll win 95% of games of football, as opposed to the Malthouse view, is which is in the Goody camp, is if we keep the opposition to X score, we will win 95% of games of football. And that's the camp that Goody's in, which is why Maisie could say it the best and fairest to you, Andy, or whatever that was, that our goal was to keep the opposition in 21 to 60 points. Then it went out in 23, for instance, to whatever it was, 75 points. I'll bet you that it's gone down to something like 65. So there'll be a team rule. The success is 65 points. So I think it's correct. And I think that, I take the point about, well, what happens when oppositions jump and we're behind the eight ball? And I think that's definitely a worry. And it's interesting. I think that, we were jumped in the game last year against the Pies in the final. There were factors at work there, and I think it's a debatable point. Maybe you're better to get a lead, but I don't think we've been behind too badly in any first quarter this year, have we? We haven't been jumped too badly in any game so far. In fact, though, have we? I would hazard a guess that we're behind in this match.
Well, Port Adelaide last week, they kicked the first 3 goals.
Yeah, but at the end of the first quarter.
Oh, yeah, we evened it up, yep.
Yeah. So how many maybe only in this game was only a few points. So so far this season, the strategy hasn't led to any blowouts in the first quarter. And the advantage that Melbourne have got over every other team is even when teams get on top, like Port were, they could only get those 3 goals. We didn't let them get 5-6 goals like Brisbane are giving up. Brisbane are giving up. They've given up 5 goals plus in a row, like 4 or 5 times this season. Melbourne won't do that in the full season, where we give up runs of 5 or 6 goals in a go. So I think a very astute observation. I think it goes to the way Goody likes to coach. And for me, the way he has his defensive system working is why he's able to coach that way. And I think it's a brilliant strategy. It goes to this idea as well as you could say, actually, with this game as a good example of it, is that his coach team, Melbourne, controls momentum better than any other team in the AFL. It's not about how much you win by, it's about winning. Which is why under Goody, if you look at his win record, as we've talked about, it's like 56% or whatever, but I'll bet my bottom dollar that he's got the highest number of wins between, say, 8 points and 23 points or something, because he's not interested in a 60-point win. For the sake of it, he's interested in the 4 points. And this game was a good example, is that if the only way that the Crows were going to win this game was to open it up and attack in that last quarter, and he wasn't going to allow it. So exactly like George said earlier, it never felt like they were coming. Like it never, at one point they got within 15 points. We got out to 33 points, but it never felt like a tsunami was coming from the Crows. It was like we held them at arm's length. So I think Mrs. Sparganet is spot on there. And I think he'll stay with that approach.
I think I'm going to need proof that there is a Mrs. Spargonicus or Sparganet. I think he may have made up a partner just in case that Big Man had poo-pooed the theory. So now that Big Man liked it, Sparganet is going to get the credit.
Was the kiss at the Neaters game was just an extra detail for the Mrs. Shoot.
You put in some extra
detail. Any lie requires a little bit.
It makes it sound believable, like the old. I've got a Canadian girlfriend. Yep. All right. Red and Blue Rising says, I love the mentality and culture this team is building. I've noticed we are one of the only teams that everyone in the club rooms, including players who didn't get selected, singing the song and getting involved. This must be what Goody and Pert were referring to when they said we will see our culture come to the fore. And we mentioned this earlier, and also love the way the team got around Sparrow for the smother that resulted in track snap, and the way that the team got around Clary for the past fritter that Maddie from Caulfield noted in the voicemail earlier. George, there were a lot of knockers on our culture in the off-season, but a lot of that was outsiders' perceptions, and I prefer to judge by what I see on the field and the results and the vision from the rooms like Red and Blue Rising mentioned, as well as what I see on the players' socials and the 2 weeks in Adelaide and the way the club integrated the partners and the kids. And I'm just not buying what any of the muckrackers are selling. What are your thoughts on the culture that the team is building?
Yeah, it's interesting. People confuse often the culture on the field with the culture off the field. They can be almost two different things, but in this case, the results are being produced by the culture on the field, which is what ultimately all we fans want to see. It's about winning games and how you win games. And what we're seeing with this team that we've seen over the last couple of years, certainly that Goody's been trying to implement, is I think it was a couple of years ago when they had one of those player get-togethers and frank speaking sessions, and somebody said, if somebody kicked a goal, you don't come and say, "Oh, that was a fluke." You congratulate them on it, or you got away with something. No, you were lucky there. No luck. No good fortune, you congratulate them for what they've done. That's how you build the culture within the side. You support your fellow players under all circumstances. So what we're seeing on the field, certainly in this early stage of this season, is players putting in absolutely 100% all the time from everybody, which is something you don't see in other sides. They give them a pat on the back if they kick a goal or something like that. But it's not just the kicking the goal. It's got to be when the guy really makes an effort or causes, something. Well, the Sparrow smother was the classic example. It wasn't the fantastic kick of Petracca. It wasn't what happened beforehand to get it in there. It was the fact that the Sparrow absolutely threw himself to create that opportunity that causes the goal. That's how you build culture.
Well said. Well said. John Demonic says the South Australia plan was executed so perfectly, you have to wonder if it wasn't 6 months in the making. October last year, did we come up with this double-header idea and pitch it to the head of AFL fixturing, given we had Harris and Petty wanting to be closer to family with a supposed interest in a trade before being convinced to stay? Perhaps his contract honouring came with a promise from the club to do the best to get him extra time with family in season. As well as a team bonding exercise from all again bubble style, it's ended up a stroke of genius. Our performance is the envy of the competition. Plan or happy coincidence? What do the team think? Bonus question. In the media, there was a talk of a rotation of teams playing Port and Adelaide in the preceding years for fairness, giving it a tough road trip at the best of times. Would the club want a match versus Port/Adelaide in Gather Round again next year if given the opportunity? Make it our locked-in fixture and another back-to-back over there, or a South Australian team and then neutral Gather Round opponent. Could we be so lucky, or would the club prefer to go back to fixturing randomness? Get out with 2 wins and not push it. I can imagine other clubs wanting to play there a week earlier now. Maybe the AFL should only give clubs the week earlier match in South Australia if they play Port or Adelaide in the Gather Round for fairness. So I have no week whether this 2-week adventure was planned or put forward by the AFL or by the Ds, or whether we were just the guinea pig and had this foisted upon us. And John, I think you're trying to tie it into the Petty trade. However, spending the 2 weeks in Adelaide certainly would have helped in the preparation, particularly with the 5-day turnaround from a tough game the week before against Port. And we definitely learnt our lesson from last year, if you remember, with the trip back from Perth the week prior to Gather Round, or we came back to Melbourne, then went to Perth. But having some of the families then join the team was a great move too, as well as bringing up some of the extra players that, yes, we did probably need them just in case we had some injuries, but it gave players like Colt and Laurie some experience of road games, and that's great prep for them too. Would I want to do that every year? If you could guarantee the 2 wins, then sure, but I think we should be given other concessions too, because look at this, guys. We've played 3 out of 5 games this year already interstate. No other team, with the exception of other interstate teams, have had to do that, and some even some haven't done that. We still have a heap of interstate trips to come. We've got 2 Perth trips, 2 Queensland trips, and our own $500,000 own goal in the Alice Spring. Knock one of those off and guarantee that no trip down the Prince's Highway, and then you've got a deal. I'll do the 2 Adelaide games again. Big man, your thoughts on future gather rounds for the Demons, and whether you'd like to see the Ds do another doubleheader against the SA teams, or do you think that there should be maybe a showdown of the 2 Adelaide teams in gather round?
Look, to be honest, I haven't really taken much interest in that whole thing, because the fixture's such a joke anyway. This idea that it would be unfair I just, to be honest, doesn't hold any water for me. The fixture is fixed. It's completely unfair. It's a joke anyway. So who cares if the Adelaide teams get some sort of leg up? As for the planning, I very much doubt we went to the AFL and said we want to go back to back. But there's no doubt it's been 6 months in planning. I know it has been. That's what the players have said, that they've been planning this for a long time, and that, that's the thing about it being a business trip. That was clearly a theme of the weekend. They learnt their lessons from the previous year. We were here on the podcast critical of the decision to fly back from Perth to Melbourne and then back to Adelaide for gather round. last year. It was super clever, that culture that George spoke about. I agree, there's on-field and off-field. I think they're sometimes conflated, but the off-field looks really strong, and there was a lot of emphasis on how many kids there were at the Port game, and that there were Easter hunts on the Sunday, and the families were there, and is it any coincidence that you've got a happy Clary and the team all getting around him? And I think they've planned it really brilliantly. They were evidently they were so obviously thrilled to get the two games. Personally, I think it's really a tough ask to play back-to-back games at Adelaide Oval because, look, 20 free kicks to 10 or whatever it was. Don't tell me that that's got nothing to do with the fact that game's at Adelaide Oval. So if we'd lost that game, it would have been a hard pill to swallow with that standard of the umpiring. However, having said all of that, do we play Port again this season?
I think we do with the MCG.
The MCG. I would be happy. They love Adelaide Oval. Melbourne have got the second best record in the last 2-4 years or something. Under Goody, it's like only Collingwood have got a better record there.
They've got a better win rate, but we've won the most games. We've won 12 at Adelaide Oval now.
Yeah, we've won more in the last, I think it's 3 years. So I would be well and truly up for us having a fixed game that first week against Port. Offer that to the AFL. So we'll play the week before against Port to get at Adelaide Oval, and you get a big crowd.
Victorian team.
Sorry.
And then
the week before, and then we'll play. But we'll do that. But we want to play Adelaide at Adelaide Oval against every 3 years we'll play the Crows. But on the other time we want to play a Victorian club.
Yeah, well, I like that. We're going to have to play an Adelaide team anyway in Adelaide, so we may as well do it before gather round and have and I think it's a good bonding thing for the team and for bring up all the young players as well.
And what's the benefit for the AFL? That Melbourne, at least for the next 3-4 years, Melbourne Port is going to be a blockbuster sellout game every single time. So that gives them a blockbuster game on, say, the Saturday night, and then the week ahead of gather round. So I that would work, I reckon.
Yeah, I'd do that.
It's interesting. Fremantle have stayed in Adelaide for their game this week as well, so they're doing the same thing. So I wouldn't read too much about planning this or asking for fixturing. It's just the way that it fell.
Yeah, but we could be proactive and say we will take we'll even play Adelaide. We'll play. We'll do the same thing again, but next you give a 7-day break instead of a 5-day break. Well, no worries. We'll play back-to-back Adelaide games at the Oval,
and give us another concession because we're still. Think of it, as I just said, we've paid 3 interstate games already this year, and then we've got so many more coming up. 2 trips to Perth, 2 to Queensland. It's Alice Springs.
That equals refusing to play at Cardinia Park at Taxpayer Park.
I guarantee you will be back at Cardinia Park next year.
And we'll have less travel interstate.
No, we'll have the same amount. I'll guarantee you. Maybe one less. Okay, here's our Dermot Brereton thing. This is from our good mate Enzo. You remember Enzo? Had him call in the last couple of weeks. This is his encounter with Dermot Brereton. Now, I don't know if this encounter actually occurred. I'm going to take Enzo at his word.
G'day, guys. It's Enzo here. How you doing? It's been a great couple of weeks beating Port Adelaide and Adelaide. Do you know how Dermot Brereton has been saying bad things about Melbourne? I can tell you the proof about Dermot Brereton. He really hates Melbourne. I was at the game. I've been in Adelaide this weekend, and I was at the game between the Bulldogs and Geelong, and I saw Dermot Brereton walking up the steps, and I said, "Hey, Dermy." I said, "Hey, Dermy." He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Hey, Dermy, the Demons are better than what you think." And do you know what he said to me? He looks at me and goes, "The Demons?" He goes, "Win something." And I said to him, "Yeah, we won the premiership a couple of years ago." He goes, "Look, that's only because of COVID." So there, Dermot Brereton, I think pure bigging heat about how he really hates Melbourne. So that's proof he really hates Melbourne. Good night and have a great podcast. See you later and go D's.
Big man, any thoughts on Dermy and his not so much love for Melbourne?
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, good Lord, how's he getting a gig that involves public speaking or talking? I mean, really, honestly, he's whatever. But that comment about Clary was it's just ridiculous. And forgetting my love of the Demons and Clary, I mean, this is part of the problem with the concussion issue. You've got people, ex-footballers, who are judging the game now based on some sort of outdated notion of what the game was. I mean, his whole career, his whole post football media career has been based on this idea of Dermot Brereton, the He-Man, playing football. And he takes across that same sort of attitude, questioning the courage of Clary. I mean, it's just completely forgetting his inability to be clear in what he's saying. It's like, that's just 25 years old, out of date thinking. And but he does seem to have an axe to grind against the D's, and I have an axe to grind against the Hawks because they flogged us for a big part of my Demons supporting years. So it's unbelievable he's still getting a gig, I reckon.
We have a voicemail from Adam from the northern suburbs of Brisbane regarding new recruit Shane McAdam.
G'day, Andy, George, and man. It's Adam calling here from the northern suburbs of Brisbane. Been a long time listening to the show, but this is the first time I've contacted you. It's a really good win on Thursday night, I thought, coming off a 5-day break. A little bit of inefficiency in front of goal, but obviously that's coming off the Port Adelaide game where we had a really good game in front of goal, I thought, but overall I thought it was a really good win, especially considering the tight time frame that we were in. I also want to say, what a joy it is to see young players like Judd McVee and Caleb Windsor running around in our colours. They both had excellent performances and, so consistent so far. At least Judd McVee has proven over the past year how consistent he is in the back line, and Caleb Windsor's shaping up in the same way. So it's really fantastic to see young players like that in the red and blue. The question I want to ask you guys today was about, because we just played Adelaide, it made me think about Shane McAdam. When he was being traded to us here, I was really excited to see what he could do in our team. But I just wanted to ask where you think he might fit into our setup and if there'll be a place for him in the team, especially considering where our forward line currently is at and the success we're having, and what role you think he might play. Anyway, thanks very much for the work you do on the show. It's really an education for me listening to you guys every week, and really, really appreciate it. Thanks.
So, George, you've seen, limited amounts of Shane McAdam from your trips to training at Gosh's Paddock, albeit he's been in the rehab group for the majority of those sessions, first with the calf complaint and then latest one, the hamstring injury. As of last week's training report, I think we've got a new training report. He was listed last week as 2 to 4 weeks. He is now 2 to 3 weeks. So if you're going to get his body right, what do you think we can expect him, and what role do you think we'll see him play if he ever gets on the field?
Well, I think that sums it up, Andy. If he ever gets on the field, it's he's been at the club since last November and has really not even got onto the training track during that period of time. We've spoken about it time and time again. When players like Viney, for example, got a decent pre-season, guess what happens? I can't see McAdam with a lack of pre-season almost totally, and injuries subsequently, even getting onto the field and having any effect before the end of the season. He might be lucky if somebody else is unlucky and gets injured. I think he was recruited as a small forward type player. But until we actually get him fit for a start off, and then obviously needs the conditioning on top of that. When you've got calves and hamstrings, we've seen with Hunter alone, how many weeks has that been? It's 10 weeks, 12 weeks, something along those lines. And for McAdam, it's been the same sort of thing. So small forward position is what we almost recruited him for, but I think we'll be lucky to see much, if anything, of him this coming season. And here it is at round 5 already, haven't seen anything of him.
I think he was more medium forward. My sense is that he was brought in to play Melksham's role. So a sort of medium forward, small medium, because he's same height as Melksham. He's actually relatively tall, McAdam. And to play that sort of defensive forward who can still kick goals, his big problem is going to be that Melksham is back in 2 months.
Yeah.
So I think he's been brought in to play Melksham's role. I think Melksham's going to beat him to that role the way things are tracking.
Yeah, yep. And I just have a feeling he's just going to be one of those players that's just always injured. You know, he might come up with a goal. I don't know. I just get that feeling. Some players are just, that's the way the body's built. We've had quite a few players over the years that are like that. Just can't keep on the park. All right. Well, we're now into the changes part. But before we get to the changes, we'll go through the injury list because there was no Casey game this week as a result of the VFL and the SANFL having a match. And just a few hours ago, we received an updated injury report for this week from Selwyn Griffiths. We also had a training report from Demonland Track Watchers, Kev Martin and Fat Tony. They had the following players in the rehab group who are on light duties: Chandler, Ben Brown, T-Mac, and more on those guys in a moment. Hunter apparently was involved in and got through a scratch match against Carlton's VFL team and is available for selection this week, but you think he might go through another game in the VFL this week given his long layoff with a calf injury. McAdam, who we just talked about, is still listed as a hamstring 2 to 3 weeks. He was also in the rehab group, and that injury just seems to be going on and on. Bowie was reported, he had the collarbone injury, 5 to 6 week, and he's just begun non-contact training. Melky with the knee injury, 10 to 12 weeks away. In the training report, Seston was said that it was suggested that he was working on his fitness, which I assume meant that he's working on his tank rather than any injury. And then he wasn't listed in the injury list. Andy Moniz Wakefield was also in the rehab group, although and he has spent quite a bit of time in and out of the rehab group over the preseason. Also wasn't listed in the injury report. Spargo, Achilles, now listed as 4 weeks. He was listed as 3 to 4 weeks last week, so his injury also seems to just be dragging on and on. And Turner with the hip injury, he was also in the rehab group, but they listed him as his hip is finally available. So I assume he'll go back to Casey and build up for a return to the ones when he's called upon. Marty Hoare with the thumb 2 to 3 weeks was not present at training. So it's not unusual, back to the guys who were in the seniors, it's not unusual for both T-Mac and Ben Brown to be on light duties at training to nurse them through the season, as we've noted in the past few weeks. And Chandler, who's had some of those knee injuries the past few weeks, but has played out both games. So I'm not surprised that he's on light duties just to nurse him through this period while he's got knee injuries. Hopefully he is okay because Cozzy's out, and then if both of them are out, our small forward stocks cupboard is going to be very bare. Let's get into the changes. We have a number of questions from Demonlanders on the changes for this week, so I'm going to read them all out and then get your thoughts, guys. So Red and Blue Rising says, my concern is we may be playing players banged up and under duress, i.e. Clary's hand and Maisie's ribs, and a couple of others who look sore. It's a long season. We need the team fresh and firing at the right time. Thoughts, please? Adelaide says, being a Demon in South Australia, it can be unbearable most of the time, but these past 2 weeks have been an early Chrissy present. Apologies to any Victorians that had to put up with the bogans of Port and the booers of Adelaide. I'll be strutting into work this morning with my D scarf and beanie. I was going to ask about your thoughts on future doubleheaders in Adelaide over the gather round, but John has already asked that one. Instead, I'll ask about our changes this week. Who do we replace Cozzy with? He's almost impossible to replace. There's simply no like for like. So who could possibly bring even a quarter of the dynamics that he brings? It might be a lot of pressure, but could we see the Colt finally get a call up? The past few weeks, you've been touting resting Ben Brown, but with the bye coming up, do we just roll the dice and play him? D-Minion says, by the very high standards that we've come to expect from Clary, he had a relatively quiet game with some brilliance sprinkled in. He is clearly hampered by his hand injury. Despite going into the bye after this week, should we be looking to rest him against the Lions in order to give his hand the time it needs to heal? After all, the season is a marathon and not a sprint, and we need these lethal hands to be cherry ripe at the pointy end of the season. If so, who would you bring in? El Diablo 14 says, what's the ideal way to manage Big Benny Brown? He can't play every single game of the season, and we need him ready for the finals. I think we have to rest him against lesser opposition and also try to avoid interstate travel. Well, he didn't avoid interstate travel this last 2 weeks. So the main question is, Cozzy, who comes in for him? If the Ds, as might be expected, are not successful in having his suspension overturned, does the Colt make his debut on the G? Does Clary's hand need a rest going into the bye to give him sufficient time to heal? Ben Brown, do we roll the dice on him to the bye or rest him and perhaps play a Tom Fullerton against his old club? Any other changes, B-Man, than you, George?
I think I'll defer to George. He's got it right every week so far, and I don't think I've got it right since about round 4 last year. So I'll let
you can
George
start
take
with Cozzy. Who replaces the Cozzy?
Colt. I hope Colt, but I mean, if it is the Colt, then he jumps ahead of AMW, which is on his Wakefield, which is went through Andy. But I'm thinking the Colt has that sort of a dynamic ability that Cozzy has.
Could they play like a Wowie? I'm not saying he like for like, but because he's been.
Well, they could shuffle around. I mean, that's
what I'm saying. Just shuffle around and Wowie. I mean, I think I'd like the Colt. I think he's more dynamic than Wowie. No knock on Wowie or Laurie, but I just want to see what. Plus,
it's great to see new players. It's always great to see. So I don't know. I'll defer to George. He seems to be getting it right a lot.
Would you? I'll ask before we go to George. Would you rest Clary? Should he be rest going into the bye?
It's a bit like I said last week. I don't know. Like, it's sort of what would my answer be based on? I got no idea on where his fitness is at. We had this discussion every year around resting Maxi and it doesn't look like it's part of the
hand.
Well, they're not going to play him if they're going to do any more damage, are they? And so, like speaking of Goodwin and Selwyn Griffith, a much discussed philosophy of Burgess was playing through pain and resilience, and Selwyn's an acolyte, isn't he, of Burgess? So I suspect he has a similar philosophy. I mean, we can see Petty he looks like he's played through a bit of discomfort. Brown the same, T-Mac the same, and Clary. So if history is evidence, then there'd be no reason to suggest that they would suddenly not play Benny Brown or Clary. Clary, his hand is probably no worse this week than it was, when he got his cast put on, or whatever that is. Not his cast; he's the equivalent of a moon boot on his hand.
His glove.
Yeah, glove.
Yeah, I don't think we'll drop Clary. If there was a problem about playing him last week, it's the same problem this week. It's obviously not going to get any worse, short of someone jumping on it or standing on it. I think the difficulty with Colt is that we didn't play Casey. Casey didn't have the game last week. They had a scratch match against Carlton. Did you say, Andy?
Yeah, I just heard that in Selwyn Griffith's presser about the injury.
Yeah.
Colt probably didn't play in that game because if he was up, he came up.
Yeah, did Colt go to Adelaide though?
He was. They brought up Colt.
Okay, yeah.
Laurie and Tomlinson were already there last week, and then after Casey's game last week, I think Colt went up and maybe someone else.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. I'd love to see Colt come in if Cozzy were to go out, but I would have Woden on the ground. I think you can't leave him on the sub bench all the time. He's the next in line from the looks of things.
Colt and Shaki were brought up after the previous Casey game.
Yeah, right. Well, we can forget about Shaki and we can forget about Fullerton. Okay, so the question then is, Benny Brown looks sore, really sore to me. Can he last one more game? This is what we have. Selwyn as the insider, knowing this sort of thing. We're not that.
And we've got the bye the next week. That's a big
fact. And we've got the bye the next week. That's the thing that'll probably sway them. Can he get through this game? Yeah, we just don't know. He looks sore. If it was any other time of the year, you'd be going, yeah, give him a rest this week. Maybe not this time. So it's really going to be difficult. We're forgetting about that bloke called Stephen May down the back, still with 2 broken ribs. He'll definitely play because he played with a 15 centimetre rip in his hamstring in a grand final. So a couple of broken ribs won't be any problem to him. But I think we've played this will be our 5th game or whatever, and we'll be looking forward to this bye for a start. Because we really need it, especially coming off a 5-day break with 2 really hard games, effectively. So it's going to be difficult.
6th game.
Yeah, 6th game. Sorry, yes, yeah.
B-Man, did you wanted to add something?
No, other than Steve May got 3 coaches' votes with busted ribs, busted vertebrae, whatever. So he's no way he's not playing.
No.
All right, let's get into the preview. The Demons are coming off 2 consecutive wins on the road to bring their tally of wins for the season to 4 after losing their first match of the year just over a month ago. Conversely, the Lions have only just won their first game of the season against perennial cellar dwellers North Melbourne. There were high expectations for the Lions this season, and many experts had tipped them to take out the flag this season, yet their 0-3 start to the year has put them behind the 8 ball. Every match now is crucial for the Lions, and so too for the Demons, as they would be wrapped with a 5-1 standing going into the bye 13 days out from Anzac Eve. The Lions' record at the MCG is not at all flash, having lost 14 of the last 15 games of the ground, and I don't have to remind Demon fans who their one win was against. Perhaps to sweeten the memory of that semi-final loss in 2022 to the Lions, you can all cast your minds back to round 18 last season when the D's trailed the Lions by 24 points with just 7 minutes and 8 seconds remaining, and then clawed the 4-goal deficit with just 33 seconds to go when Jake Melksham kicked a pinpoint goal for a set shot to win the match. Smurf says, when the fixture came out and I saw this block of 3 games leading into the bye, the back-to-back Adelaide games and a match-up against last year's grand finalist Brisbane, I was very worried and thought we'd be lucky to escape with 1 win. My hardwired negativity, which thanks to this podcast I now have a name for, MFCSS, I anxiously feared that we could have lost a lot. Fast forward to the end of gather round, and we collected the 2 on the road wins and are facing the Lions team that was toothless in the first few rounds and have finally found a soft kangaroo outfit to prey on. Still, we can't take them lightly. For the most part, they still have their personnel that took them to within a claw of having their paws on a premiership cup. Their forward line can be potent with their talls, mediums and smalls, all capable of finding the big sticks. Their midfield has a dual Brownlow medalist roaming around, and they do have a solid defence. How do you go about capping off a wonderful 3 weeks? How do we go about capping off a wonderful 3 weeks so that we can sit back and relax during the bye? So, George, followed by Midman, how do we beat the Lions to cap off a successful couple of weeks?
There's a couple of things going on at the Lions. Firstly, their off-season antics, I think, have genuinely affected them. If there's disquiet amongst players because of what happened and with who,
don't mention the culture.
Don't mention the word culture. Yep.
Word, George.
That's the first factor. The reality is, as Smurf has pointed out, they've lost 3 games and they've just managed to beat the Kangaroos, the lowly Kangaroos. I watched a fair bit of that game. If it wasn't for Lachie Neale in that game, Brisbane would have lost it. Danaher and Hipwood is just awful at the moment, so that'll guarantee that he'll kick 7 goals against us,
and from
every angle. But really, it was Lachie Neale. What really surprised me was people like McInerney, 2 marks for the whole game for the ruckman, the big ruckman. He will get monstered if he's in the same form next week. Max will absolutely monster him. McInerney in the past has been a problem to us. But I think the other thing that's really affecting Brisbane is actually straight out injuries. Kitty Coleman it was their driver from the back line. That's how the ball finished up. That's how the ball finished up in the hands of Hipwood and Danaher. all the time. He's not there. He is a huge out for them. The other one that they've got out, the other one's Connor McKenna. Again, a strong running player that delivers the ball into the forward line. Ashcroft's not available at the moment. He's a to be confirmed. Zach Bailey's a to be confirmed, so they're missing a lot of the. And Dodie, of course, hasn't played. I don't think he's played this season. So their backline without McKenna, without Coleman, and without Dodie starts to look a bit slim. And the rest of their players aren't playing all that well. So I have a feeling this will be a completely different Brisbane side that we come up against compared to what we've had in the past. And the other thing is, it's in Melbourne. It's not at the Gabba.
And the other thing about the injuries before you go, big man, Lachie Neale in 2 games this year has ended up on the bench with a big ice pack on his ankle. He has, and they're obviously playing him through an ankle injury, but still Lachie Neale.
He's still pretty prolific, but that's always good news.
And I think that, I mean, some of their issues get exposed. I've always thought their biggest issue with the MCG is their lack of leg speed. I mean, I think they're a super talented list. They've got, those medium forwards are the ones that have always bothered us. The Link McCarthy. Where so much better. McCluggage, Bailey, who, they're the ones who carve us up, and they're the ones who almost won them the flag, as we discussed at the end of last season. But all of those players are down at the moment. And one of their big issues that will get exposed at the G is they've never been a quick side in terms of leg speed. But without Kitty Coleman, not only are they lacking that player who's bouncing it from a half-back flank, they're actually literally missing his leg speed, as well as it's Ashcroft, isn't it? So, missing his raw leg speed. They look, a little bit slow. But despite their lack of leg speed, what they were really good at last season was they were surprisingly good at transitioning from the back half with a style that we've adopted a little bit, which is that chip mark, but chip mark going forward, not going laterally across the ground. We've sort of taken that up a bit, and also the ability to take contested marks down the line. So it's interesting that McInerney didn't, for instance, against the Roos. Of any team, you'd think he would be able to do that against them. But the other issue that they've got is that they're not bouncing from the half-back line at all. So I think they're right down the bottom from scores from the back half. They're number 18th in the AFL for rebounds, 50s per game. That's, that's North Melbourne level. If you cannot bounce the ball from the back half, and that's not even a new thing, that's always been the case. You need to be able to transition the ball. But the way footy's being played again at the moment, hopefully we're fit and running on top of the ground, because we'll expose them on transition, I think. And they're not moving the ball. Partly that's to do with Kitty Coleman, but they're just struggling to move the ball from their back half. So, if that Pies Brisbane game was a pretty average game of footy, I have to say. I watched it, and they didn't look very impressive, and they weren't very impressive against the Roos. So who knows, what the truth of all of the off-season is and what the impact is. But they're not playing cohesively. They're not transitioning the ball. Their strengths are, the only way that forward line of theirs with Hipwood and Danaher works properly is when they move it quickly into there to give them lots of one-out opportunities. If they're not doing that, it just means that, particularly a strong zone defense like the D's, is that we'll chop them apart, because if there's any delay on the ball coming inside 50, then, we know that the T-Max or the Lever or May will zone off, or even, Howes was doing it, zoning off. Rivers did a couple on the weekend where, they'll come in and impact that aerial contest. So key for us will be just slowing their movement down from the back half, which we've been the number one in the AFL at, I think number 2 in the AFL at stopping teams transitioning from the back half, and doing the opposite is transitioning hard from the back half ourselves and getting lots of good looks inside 50. And the weather's good, Andy. It's rain in the morning, clearing up in the afternoon,
and that's the other factor. The overnight temperature 11 degrees, so Brisbane will suffer.
Yeah, I don't think, as much as it's great that they got their win against the Roos, is playing the Roos at it was at Norwood, wasn't it?
Norwood, yeah,
is playing the Roos, who look appalling, to be honest. At Norwood, any preparation for playing the rampaging D's at the MCG? I don't think so.
A soft kill. You always love a soft kill.
4 points go to 5-6-1. No, would that be 5-1? 5-1. And our season is well and truly set up.
All right, I think we're going to leave it there for tonight, and we'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, then just please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. And thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to AI Redirect and Track Forever. Thank you to our voice bailers. Had a lot this week. Demon Princess, Salty, Maddie from North Caulfield, Enzo, and Adam from the northern suburbs of Brisbane. Your questions and comments are an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Demon WA, Lazy, Go Lordy, D-Star9, Ross Millen, Bigfoot, Bush Demon, Joe, Boy, Mandy, Lorian, Master Chief, Leave It to Diva, Red Jacket, D Old Fart, Old Man Rivers, Singer, Scroll, Jane02, Spargonicus and Sparganet, Red and Blue Rising, John Demonic, Radelaide, D Minion, El Diablo 14 and Smurf. Thank you to my co-hosts. Oh, yes.
Andy in the chat room, thanks to you, Demon Land was in there. John Demonic, Demon Dynasty, Engorged Onion, you again, and Jabroni and Binman's PA. Thanks for in the chat room. So there is a chat room that runs alongside this if anyone wants to go into the chat room next week.
Yes, demonland.com/podcast to get in on that. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Binman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll read it out on the show next week. Go Demons!
Go Red Leggers!